Today on Killer Bites, we'll be talking about Dina Schlosser. After committing a horrific crime, Dina Schlosser was nicknamed the Plano Baby Chopper. I wish I was lying when I told you her nickname was a metaphor, but it's not. This woman literally chopped her baby's arms off with a kitchen knife, all because God told her to. Stick around for more details. Dina and John Schlosser lived in Plano, Texas with their 3 daughters, ages 9, 6, and 10 months old. On November 22nd, 2004, John got a call from Dina saying she'd just cut off their baby's arms. He thought she was joking, even though Dina had a history of mental illness. Regardless, when you hear a claim like that, it should be taken seriously. Instead of calling the police, John called the pastor of his church. The pastor told John to call someone who can check on Dina and their baby Margaret to make sure everything is okay. He then called his neighbor Carolyn, who worked at a daycare center in the area, and asked for them to check on Dina and Margaret. Carolyn called Margaret on the phone, and that's when things started to get real. It's unclear what the phone call entailed, but whatever it was, it led a fellow daycare employee to call the police. 911 dispatcher Steve Edwards then called Dina to see if everything was okay. Dina picked up the phone and calmly told Steve she just cut off her baby's arms. Steve asked Dina if she wanted to help her baby, and she smugly said no. As if this woman didn't already seem crazy enough, Steve said he heard church hymns playing in the background. Like, what is this woman's deal? With that, police officers and paramedics rushed to the scene. Officer David Tilley was the first to arrive. He found Dina covered in red fluid with a gash on her shoulder and a 9-inch kitchen blade in her hand. One report said she was sitting at her computer table, casually reading her Bible with the gospel song "He Touched Me" playing in the background. Oh my god, this is like straight out of a horror movie. David was able to convince Dina to hand him the blade, and when she did, he noticed pieces of flesh on it. Ugh, I bet his stomach was in knots. More officers showed up, and they found the almost 11-month-old baby Margaret in her crib in the back bedroom. Sadly, the claims were true. Margaret's arms had indeed been cut off, and she was losing fluid quickly. Margaret was rushed to the hospital while officers interviewed Dina. Dina showed absolutely no emotion during her interview. She admitted to cutting off her baby's arms with a dazed look in her eyes. Apparently, Dina saw this story on the news about a lion attacking a young boy and took it as a sign of the apocalypse. God then commanded her to cut off the arms of her baby, and she obeyed. Dina also said God told her to cut her arms off after that, which is why she had the wound on her shoulder. During her interview, Dina was praying. She said, "Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Lord." She was also humming church hymns. While officers read Dina her rights and arrested her, she was smiling and continuing to praise God. It's so messed up. As for Margaret, it was too late to save her. Not only were both of her arms completely severed at the shoulder, but Margaret also had over 50 wounds on her face. A medical examiner theorized the facial injuries were a result of Margaret flailing during the incident. As sad as it is, Margaret would have had a very difficult life given these circumstances. But then again, the circumstances could have been completely avoided. While all of this was going on, John was heading back from work in Arlington to his apartment in Plano, which was about a 45-minute drive. He got a call from his apartment complex that the police were at his unit, so he called the police to see what was going on. I just want to point out that this was the first time John called the police about this situation. It's so weird to me that he called his pastor first and never followed up until now. John told the dispatcher that he was on his way home from work. He said, "I need to know what's going on. My wife and child are in there." The dispatcher replied, "I'm sorry, but no, they aren't. Not anymore." It seems as if John had no idea what had actually gone down in the apartment. And as bad as I want to feel for John, he honestly should have seen this coming. Dina had been showing signs of mental instability, and John was even told by the CPS she shouldn't be left alone with the kids. Yeah, let me give you some more backstory on Dina and John to paint the full picture for you. For starters, Dina was diagnosed with hydrocephalus at age 8. Hydrocephalus is the fancy way of saying fluid is building up buildup in the brain. When left untreated, it can cause excess brain growth, tissue damage, and brain damage. Over the next 5 years, Dina underwent 8 surgeries where shunts were put into her brain. Because of her medical issues and constant surgeries, Dina had to keep her head shaved. This caused a lot of bullying, unfortunately. You know how mean kids can be at that age. Clearly, Dina had an unconventional childhood. She was constantly in the hospital, and anytime she got out, she was bullied. That's a lot for a child to bear. But thankfully, Dina had a wonderful mom who was forever loving and supportive. Anyway, fast forward a bit, and Dina graduated high school and went to Marist College in New York. That's where she met John. They hit it off, and things got pretty serious. Dina graduated with a bachelor's in psychology, but John never finished school, even though his parents had paid his tuition in full. Instead, he got married to Dina. They had 2 daughters together and moved to Fort Worth, Texas. John tried to find a job in computer science, but most of his time was spent on unemployment, partly because he never finished college. One time, John's friend hooked him up with a computer science job that he turned down because he would only accept a position as head of their IT department. As for Dina's employment journey, there are 2 different stories. One report said Dina went through several jobs and left them all for various reasons. For example, she quit her job at Visa because a customer was rude to her. She walked out on another job because someone lied to her, and she quit her position at a nursing home because she was offended by something. Another report said John didn't let Dina have a job. Both could be true at different times. Like maybe after Dina quit all those jobs, that's when John said she couldn't work anymore. The bottom line is the family was struggling financially. The best solution they came up with was to join a church. And here's where Doyle Davidson comes into our story. So Doyle used to be a vet, but he apparently had all of these visions where God spoke to him saying he should sell his animal hospital and start a church. He obeyed and founded a fundamentalist church named Water of Life. You could say Doyle's teachings are quite unique. He basically tells all of his followers that anytime they have any issue like debt, a disease, family drama, anything, it's because the devil is sending demons to hijack your soul. Doyle's sermons used to be televised until he said that the victims of Columbine would have survived if they had more faith. Well, John heard about Doyle's perspective on problems and was like, oh, amazing. I just need to go to church and the money will start flowing. Dina was also on board. She felt very unwanted by John, and her mom, who was her main support system, was just diagnosed with Parkinson's. So this whole the church solves all of your problems idea sounded like a dream. But the Schlossers' problems only got worse after joining this church, which they went to up to 6 times a week, by the way. John wanted to find a better paying position, and instead of looking for one while he kept working his current job, he just quit. He started doing some consulting gigs, which just led to an even worse financial situation for the Schlossers. It got so bad that their house was foreclosed and they had to move. So of course, they decided to move to Plano, Texas to be closer to the church. In Plano, Dina got pregnant and gave birth to Margaret on January 9th, 2004. Unfortunately, Dina suffered from postpartum depression. This time it was much worse than after her other 2 pregnancies. Dina also had 3 miscarriages before birthing any of her daughters, so it seemed like the woman's hormones were constantly fluctuating. And I can't imagine the emotional toll that many miscarriages can have on one person. Anyway, after having Margaret, Dina's depression was worse than ever. The day after she gave birth, she sliced her wrists with scissors in what most people think was an attempt to end her life. But Dina says it was just a test to see if God would really heal her, which he did. A week later, Dina was watching TV and thought the characters were laughing at her. So she left her 3 kids alone in the house while she ran down the street screaming. Dina was having a psychotic episode. Dina's 5-year-old daughter was so freaked out that she followed behind her mom on her bike. After this, Dina was admitted to a psychiatric hospital where she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, postpartum psychosis, and depression. With this diagnosis, CPS was called and an investigation was conducted on the family. CPS determined Dina unfit to be alone with her children. After Dina had been in the hospital for 2 days, John decided it was time for her to come home. Dina didn't want to leave though. She knew something was wrong with her mind and wanted to stay there until she felt better. But John prayed about it and concluded Dina was just being possessed by demons and was fine to come home. He also refused refused to get the medication Dina was prescribed because Doyle preached about how medicine is witchcraft. Days later, Dina hadn't gotten any better, and she knew it. She kept pleading with John to let her go back to the hospital, but he refused and continued sending up prayers to the Lord, all of which ended in the Lord telling John no medical intervention was needed. One time, Dina ran away from home and took herself to a hospital. That's how bad she wanted to get better. But the next morning, John found her at the hospital and promptly took her home. John eventually had to get Dina the medication she was prescribed per orders by the CPS. The CPS followed up a few times on the family, but once they were told Dina was on her medication and would not be left alone with the kids, the case was closed. But as I'm sure you've gathered, Dina stopped taking her meds and was left alone with her children. About a week before Dina's crime, she told John she wanted to give Margaret to Doyle and marry him. Well, she said she wanted to give her baby to the Lord, but Doyle was as close as she could get. John was not pleased by this one bit, so he spanked her with a wooden spoon in front of the kids. And that brings us to the day of the crime. So now that you know all of this backstory, you can tell how complicated the case was, right? Dina was suffering from several mental illnesses that were left untreated. John, who was the sane adult in the family, should have heeded the direction of doctors and CPS workers, but he didn't. At the same time, Dina obviously shouldn't have severed Margaret's arms, but she was very clearly mentally unwell. After her arrest, Dina was placed on suicide watch. Authorities say she just sat there banging her head against the wall, saying, "There is no depression, only God." John and Dina's two surviving daughters were taken by CPS, and both John and Dina had to undergo a psych eval. Professionals diagnosed John with narcissistic personality traits and concluded he did not do enough to protect his children from Dina. CPS told John that in order to get the kids back, his sister had to move in with them. He was also ordered to take parenting classes and psychotherapy. As for Dina, she was confirmed to have bipolar disorder with psychotic features. She was first deemed unfit to stand trial, but over time that changed. Dina ended up having 2 trials for the crime. In the first trial, Doyle took the stand and said he barely knew the Schlossers at all. But he did give the jury his 2 cents on mental illness, saying it's satanic, and admitted to telling his followers not to take medication for any illness. The jury just couldn't make up their mind, and I can't blame them. This is a tough case. So the first trial ended in a hung jury, and a second trial date was set. At the second trial, the defense presented a new finding. Dina had a brain tumor that professionals believed could have caused her hallucinations. That, on top of her mental illnesses, led the jury to decide Dina was not guilty by reason of insanity. Dina was ordered to go to a treatment facility and never step foot near her family again, which John was totally chill with because he'd already filed for a divorce. Oh, and he eventually regained custody of his 2 older daughters, by the way. Dina spent about 4 years in a treatment facility where she was roommates with Andrea Yates. If you don't know about Andrea, she's a criminal who drowned her 5 kids in a bathtub because the devil told her to. Her story is eerily similar to Dina's, and the two became great friends during their time in the facility together. Dina was released in November of 2008 on the grounds of her taking birth control, antipsychotic meds, going to therapy, and staying away from children. She was out in the free world until April of 2010 when someone caught her walking around in the middle of the night in a daze. She was off her meds. Dina was placed back in a mental facility and subsequently released. In 2012, Dina was spotted working at a Walmart in Plano under her maiden name. A news story aired about the situation and Dina was promptly fired. I guess Walmart management had no idea who she really was, which is a little crazy considering the fact that her crime took place in the same city. In 2020, Dina was ordered to remain in a state hospital because of her religious delusions. There is no way for anyone to monitor if Dina is taking her meds in the free world, and a judge deemed the risk too dangerous. It seems like Dina had several chances to regularly take her medication, and she didn't oblige. I don't blame the judge for making this call, considering what Dina is capable of. Everything about this case is sad and unfortunate. Margaret should still be alive. Dina should have taken her meds, and John should have seen the signs that Dina needed help. Oh, also, Doyle should have never said those things about medication and mental illness. Things like bipolar disorder and depression are chemical imbalances in the brain that can only be stabilized with medication. No matter how much you pray, you still need to treat illnesses. Science and religion can coexist, people. All right, let me stop myself before I get too far in this rant. Let me know your thoughts on this case in the comments below. I'm Brandy, and this is Killer Bites. Thanks for watching.
Many of us will end up in a hospital at some point of our lives, trusting our doctors and nurses to provide us with the care that we need to get healthy. But what if that weren't the case? What if you were unfortunate enough to encounter someone who abused their position to hurt you? Today, we're going to talk about Beverly Allett, the nightmare nurse, whose victims were under her care during her time in a children's ward in England. That's right, not patients, victims. Hello, I'm your host Sam, and welcome back to Killer Bites. In 1991, nurse Beverly Allett murdered 4 children and attacked 9 others in her care. Before she became the serial killer nightmare nurse, Beverly Allett was just another small-town girl from Lincolnshire County, England. Allett was born on October 4th, 1968. By all accounts, her family was normal, but as she approached adolescence, young Beverly began to struggle. At around 10 years old, she started wearing a bandage to school to get sympathy. She noticed that she got attention for this and developed a habit of faking injuries. She even went as far as making a DIY plaster cast. When people started to get used to the fake cast, she started to harm herself to get more visible injuries. According to the prevailing theory, what eventually developed into Munchausen by proxy started as Munchausen syndrome, a mental illness where someone willfully makes themselves ill for sympathy or attention. Someone with this condition is aware that they are not sick, but are driven to harm themselves or exaggerate illness in order to get what they want. She was lonely during her teenage years and spent most of her time moving from doctor to doctor. As soon as one suspected that she might be faking it, she would look for a new one. Her commitment to this went so far that she was able to have a perfectly healthy appendix removed and then picked at the sutures to complicate her recovery. What kind of normal parents see their child going through this and then don't get her help? Due to her barely attending school because of her undiagnosed Munchausen syndrome, her grades suffered. Just when it seemed that she had no future after graduating at 17, a family friend who was a nurse helped enroll her in a vocational nursing school. It was there that her predisposition for harm and morbid interest in medicine began to fester. While in nursing school, she worked at a local pub where she lied so much to the regulars that they nicknamed her the Fable. She met Stephen Briggs at the pub when she was 19, and they had a very brief marriage. Stephen later revealed that they divorced because Beverly was physically and verbally abusive. She was also a compulsive liar. The lie that broke their marriage was when she told him that she had been raped and she was pregnant with the rapist's baby. When Stephen realized this wasn't true, he was shocked. On top of the abuse that he had suffered, lying to this extent crossed the line. After their breakup, her Munchausen syndrome clearly took a turn. Her last year in school, she reportedly took 160 sick days. When she moved into the nurses' dormitories that year, strange things started to happen, and one of the worst things was that someone smeared feces all over the communal kitchen's oven. She also did bizarre things using medical equipment. One time she injected a syringe full of water directly into her breast, making it abnormally large. The combination of strange behavior like this and missing nearly half of her training left her as the only trainee not offered a permanent position. They did want to offer her something, so they gave her a 6-month temporary contract at the children's ward at Grantham Hospital, also known as Ward 4. The fact they put their least competent nurse in charge of children blows my mind. One of the nurses who already worked there said it was unusual that they hired a nurse with 0 experience with children and that they would usually need someone with at least a year of additional training. Then she admitted that because they were so short-staffed, they were grateful for the extra hand. Beverly Allett's first shift on Ward 4 was February 18th, 1991. She was 22 years old. It was a small hospital that staff described as a nice place to work, and they saw their other employees as family. Her superiors recognized her enthusiasm, especially because she arrived during a surge of winter illnesses that had them unusually busy. Liam James Taylor, a 7-week-old baby with pneumonia, was sent to Ward 4, where he ended up under Nurse Beverly's care. She comforted the exhausted, distraught parents, and then she told them that their tiny baby was safe and that they could go home and get some rest while he stayed in the hospital. The next day, they returned to the hospital only to find that Liam was worse. He had suffered a respiratory attack during the night. Nurse Beverly volunteered to stay the additional night to look after him, even though she wasn't scheduled and that she wouldn't be paid for it. In the next 24 hours, he had 3 more respiratory attacks. He was resuscitated each time, but on the 3rd attack, the machines monitoring his vitals didn't sound the alarm. Nurse Beverly happened to rush in and found him after he had gone into cardiac arrest for the 3rd time. He was pale, his lips were blue, and he was covered in red splotches. He was only 7 weeks old and suffered severe brain damage. His parents were forced to make the unthinkable decision to take him off of life support. Baby Liam's death was a devastating blow to his parents and the hospital, but this was only the first of a series of tragic events that followed. 2 weeks later, on March 5th, 1991, Timothy Hardwick, an 11-year-old with cerebral palsy and epilepsy, had a seizure at school and was admitted to the Ward 4 to be monitored. After only a couple hours at the hospital, he went into sudden cardiac arrest, just like Liam Taylor before. He stopped breathing, and the team of doctors weren't able to bring him back. At 6:15 that evening, Timothy Hardwick was pronounced dead. This shocking death came out of nowhere. The doctors did an autopsy to see if they could find a cause, but the results were inconclusive, so they decided that the cardiac arrest was related to his epilepsy. A week before Timothy Hardwick's tragic death, a 15-month-old baby named Kaylee Desmond had been admitted with a chest infection. She had made a recovery and Nurse Beverly was assigned to help collect her things. Out of nowhere, the infant went into cardiac arrest 2 times in under an hour. Because she had 2 attacks in a row, the doctors sent her to the nearby Nottingham Hospital, where there were more robust treatment options. The doctors at Nottingham thoroughly looked into how an otherwise healthy baby recovering from a chest infection could go into cardiac arrest. After examining Kaylee Desmond, they found nothing except a puncture mark and an air bubble in her armpit, which they chalked up to an accidental infection from the hospital. Kaylee survived, but she was never the same. She has severe PTSD and a disability from the lack of oxygen to her brain during the 2 cardiac arrests. Another 2 weeks later, a 5-month-old baby named Paul Crampton was being monitored in Ward 4 after recovering from a chest infection. What was supposed to be a day or 2 visit to make sure this baby had a full recovery turned into an absolute nightmare. Within a few hours of him being admitted, Paul Crampton had gone into sudden cardiac arrest. The doctors rushed to him and they were able to save him. While they are running diagnostics to try and figure out what happened, he went into a 2nd cardiac arrest. They resuscitated him again, but the 2nd time he was left in a severely weakened state. They tried giving him glucose and he was able to recover. The speedy recovery struck the doctors as odd, so they kept him for a few more days to monitor him. A few days later, just as baby Paul was about to go home, he went into a 3rd cardiac arrest. This time, they decided to transport him to the better equipped Nottingham Hospital. Who jumped at the chance to heroically stay by his side with his mother in the ambulance? None other than Nurse Beverly Allett. When the results came back from the lab, they were shocked to find that Paul Crampton's blood insulin level was at 500. The normal amount for a baby his age is between 10 and 15. Paul Crampton made a full recovery and never suffered a cardiac arrest or insulin-related problems for the rest of his life. The day Paul Crampton went home with his family, 5-year-old Bradley Gibson was admitted to Grantham Hospital to be treated for a chest infection. Despite being sick, he had a charming personality that endeared him to the nurses. They had him on an IV for antibiotics, and that night Bradley complained that the IV was hurting him. Nurse Beverly went to his room to help. When she was there, he slumped over, stopped breathing, and his heart stopped. The team hurried in to resuscitate him, and they had to use an adult dosage of shocks for 30 minutes to save his life. They ran tests and found the same abnormally high insulin levels in his blood as Paul Crampton. But because the tests were done at 2 different hospitals, no one was communicating this pattern that was developing. Meanwhile, that evening, Bradley Gibson went into cardiac arrest for a 2nd time. Nurse Beverly rushed to his side and the team resuscitated him again. This 2nd event got him transferred to Nottingham for more expert care. And just like the others who made it there, he survived but suffers to this day. He couldn't use his legs until after years of physical therapy. He couldn't control his bladder for a number of years afterwards, and he had recurring nightmares. All of these strange cases happened in only the 1st month that Beverly Allett was placed in Ward 4. This pattern baffled everyone, but no one had any explanation for what was happening. On March 22nd, just over 2 weeks after Timothy Hardwick's death, Yik Hung Chan, a 2-year-old also known as Henry, was taken to the hospital after he fell and cracked his head. Nurse Beverly attended to his fractured skull, and within hours of arriving at Ward 4, he suddenly stopped breathing. breathing. Just like the other cases, the staff rushed to him and he was sent to Nottingham Hospital. He made a recovery and never had another cardiac arrest. Just like Kaylee, Paul, and Bradley, he was better as soon as he was taken away from Ward 4 and the overly attentive nurse who was with them all just before they stopped breathing. Unfortunately, Nottingham Hospital decided this random cardiac arrest was due to his skull fracture. At this point, it literally blows my mind that the hospitals are not picking up on a pattern. But sadly, the next victim never made it to the larger hospital. On April 1st, 1991, Becky and Katie Phillips were prematurely born twins, only 9 weeks old, that ended up in Ward 4. Becky was admitted first because of severe stomach issues, and a small baby that's pretty scary, so she was kept under close watch. In just a couple of days, as soon as she was beginning to recover, Nurse Beverly found her not breathing and she was resuscitated. She bounced back quickly from the cardiac arrest and was sent home. Once she was home, however, she went into convulsions, and the distraught parents called a doctor to come and examine the newborn. He said her constant crying was colic and told the parents to soothe her as best they could and take her to the hospital the following morning. They went to bed, and the next day when they came to the crib, their 9-week-old baby had died. They were devastated and terrified that Becky's twin Katie might suffer the same fate, so they brought her to the hospital to be safe. When they arrived at the children's ward, they were greeted by the familiar and comforting face of Nurse Beverly Allett, who assured them she would take care of her. Lo and behold, after only a few hours in the hospital, Katie stopped breathing. Like previous cases, she was treated by doctors, but after going into cardiac arrest twice, they transferred her to Nottingham Hospital. Upon arrival, the doctors examined the baby and found that she had 5 broken ribs. No one knew how this happened, but the doctors connected her lungs collapsing to the broken ribs. The doctors seemed satisfied with this conclusion and somehow still didn't see a pattern of harm being done to the children transferred from Grantham's Ward 4. Katie Phillips survived, but was left with cerebral palsy due to the lack of oxygen from her attacks. Despite the diagnosis of a lifelong disability, the grief-stricken parents were so grateful their other daughter lived that they asked Nurse Beverly Allett to be Katie's godmother. Allett was that convincing as the caring nurse she pretended to be. Beverly Allett went above and beyond, volunteering her time to care for these patients so no one suspected that she was harming them. A small boy named Patrick Elstone was the last victim in a string of near-identical attacks. He stopped breathing, turned blue, and it was Nurse Beverly who happened to be there despite the monitors he was connected to not alerting the rest of the staff. On April 22nd, 15-month-old Claire Peck was brought to Ward 4 after an asthma attack. Claire had suffered from asthma since her birth, and the staff knew her very well, but this was the first time that she had been in while Nurse Beverly was on staff. She was put on a ventilator and was watched over by none other than Nurse Beverly while Claire's parents went to an office to talk to the doctors. And after only a short time, the baby had 2 cardiac attacks. The first she recovered from, but the second one left her too weak to survive. Her heart stopped and she was pronounced dead. Her grieving parents were at the bedside as she passed away. The staff who knew Claire were devastated and remembered this as the saddest day they had witnessed at Grantham Hospital. Her death was ruled by the coroner as natural causes, but a pediatric consultant named Dr. Porter was concerned by the number of infant deaths due to cardiac arrest in the hospital over the past couple months. He filed a formal inquiry thinking that this was a case of the hospital's operations, but never expecting the terrible truth behind these deaths. Dr. Porter came up with a list of the 13 children from the past 2 months prior that suffered similar fates. They had all stopped breathing, turned blue, and followed a matching but random pattern. He brought this to the police and told them that he had no proof, but that he knew something wasn't right. The police looked at the report and deemed it a staff issue, not a criminal case. They did, however, open a formal inquiry. After visiting the hospital, Superintendent Stuart Clifton saw that something suspicious was going on, despite everyone else thinking that there was nothing. He knew that there was foul play. Stuart Clifton thought that if there was even a chance that someone was harming children, this was worth looking into. The police became a constant presence at the hospital in order to investigate the case. They started by interviewing everyone that worked at Ward 4. The nurses went first, and Beverly Allett was one of the earliest interviews. The police remembered her as warm, enthusiastic, and passionate about her job. At this point in her life, she has perfected the art of creating the illusion of the caring nurse. Her interview went off without a hitch. Meanwhile, another detective, Neil Jones, was able to locate a fridge at Grantham Hospital where blood samples were being stored. This allowed him to go through all the blood samples. He managed to recover 9 test tubes out of the 13 children that were attacked. Every one of the blood tests showed extremely high insulin levels. Each child that had suffered a sudden cardiac arrest or stopped breathing had abnormally high levels of injectable in their system, the investigators feared that someone in the hospital could have been intentionally overdosing these children with insulin. The police went to the hospital to find out where the insulin was stored. Turned out, the key that normally locked the fridge containing insulin and other went missing a couple months prior. The last person who was known to have the keys was, any guesses? Nurse Beverly Allett. The police compiled all the tests and case files. They discovered that all shared one thing. Nurse Beverly Allett had been working on the days of the assaults. Remember, she had only been working there for 2 days before the first attack. This placed her squarely as the prime suspect in the case, and the authorities acted quickly to prevent any further harm. They started to look into Beverly Allett's personal life, and they quickly saw that she had Munchausen syndrome. Once harming herself was no longer an option, she developed Munchausen by proxy. By proxy means instead of harming yourself for sympathy or attention, you harm another. This is particularly troubling because the caretakers, while being the cause of the harm, appear externally caring and loving. On May 1st, 1991, at 7 a.m., the police arrived at Beverly Allett's house to arrest her. They didn't have a lot of evidence, so they had to be careful. They were officially arresting her for stealing the key to the fridge where the insulin was stored and the attempted murder of Paul Crampton. They took her to the police station for an interview, and while Stuart Clifton expected the young woman to give a full confession, her demeanor was strangely calm and confident, and she committed fully to her caring nurse role. She was clear-headed. It was almost as if she expected this and planned for it. While she was being held, officers went to her house and they found some damning evidence. The missing parts of the nursing log, specifically Paul Crampton's files, were there along with a syringe. The police brought a psychiatrist to speak with Beverly Allett and confirm the mental illness they suspected she had. The psychiatrist agreed with their suspicions and thought that her Munchausen syndrome started in elementary school. She was converted to Munchausen by proxy when she realized that she couldn't continue to work and be ill. When she discovered that she could be praised for saving a sick child by their parents, things clicked into place. She harmed these children so that she could save the day. The psychiatrist also said she had a personality disorder that allowed her to do this for so long without realizing the consequences. It was clear to the police that she wouldn't confess to this. After holding her for 72 hours, the police didn't have enough evidence to hold her, so they had no other choice than to release a suspected child murderer. While Stuart Clifton and the police investigated other cases to find more evidence, Beverly went to live with a close friend, Tracy Jobson, along with her 14-year-old brother, Jonathan, and her mother, Eileen. As soon as Beverly Allett left the hospital, the mysterious attack stopped. When she showed up at the Jobsons, strange things started happening. Someone put bleach in Jonathan's bed and their family dog was poisoned with pills. After staying with them a few days, Tracy Jobson's brother Jonathan got incredibly sick while they were out shopping. He had a hypoglycemic attack. Jonathan told Eileen that Allett gave him a juice that tasted funny. When Eileen figured out that she had given her son insulin poisoning, she called the police. By November 1991, the police had enough evidence to charge Beverly Allett with 4 counts of murder, 8 counts of attempted murder, and 1 count of grievous bodily harm. When she was brought in for an interview this time, she had clearly been advised by a lawyer and gave a deadpan no reply when asked anything. Over the next 15 months, Beverly Allett was held at Wakefield Prison while she awaited her trial until February 15, 1993. She pleaded not guilty and refused to take the stand. In fact, citing illness, Beverly only attended less than half of the trial. During the trial, prosecutors brought troubling new information to light. It turned out that not only was she poisoning these small children, she was abusing them. Moments after inflicting terrible suffering, she would put on a kind nurse persona and ingratiate herself to her victims' parents. The prosecution also found that every time the monitors had been malfunctioning, as you might suspect, it was because Beverly Allett had been turning them off. In addition, when the children were being resuscitated with oxygen, she would pinch the oxygen tubes to prevent them from getting what they needed to recover. The prosecution's case was airtight. The jury convicted her of all 13 counts and she was given 13 life sentences. The judge called her an evil woman and not once has she expressed any remorse for what she did. She was sentenced and sent to Holloway Prison to serve out her time. During the trial, she didn't meet the criteria that she was mentally ill. After being at Holloway only a week, she refused to eat or drink and then she was moved to Rampton Secure Hospital. Now 55 years old, her minimum sentence tariff of 30 years expired in 2021, and if she is deemed able to transfer to a prison, she will be able to apply for parole. One of the victims, Kaylee Asher, who is now 31, fears that Beverly Allett will come back to get her if she's ever released. The children's wing at Grantham Hospital, also known as Ward 4, was shut down after the trial, but the trauma of her actions remains. Since she is never given an explanation, we will forever be left wondering why she committed these heinous acts. Let us know in the comments what you think. Was she mentally ill, or was she a cold-blooded killer? Thank you for watching this episode of Killer Bites. I'm Sam, and we'll see you next time.
My sister's baby is dead. We just picked him up on the babysitter. CPR. There's CPR on that baby. We don't know how. We don't know how. Is he? You have him on his back? Yep, he's on his back. Okay, I need you to tip his head back. He's freezing cold. He's freezing cold. Tip his head back, Heather. Tip his head back. I need you to blow into his mouth. No, nose. Into his nose.
It's every parent's worst nightmare when they hear about a babysitter who wasn't paying attention and let their child jump on the bed and fall off. But you know what's worse? When the babysitter is accused of downright abusing their child. And that's unfortunately what Heather Garnder experienced with her babysitter. It ended up costing the child's life. My name is Brandy, and you're watching Killer Bites.
Into his nose. Laundromat. We're at the laundromat. I don't know what to do. I can't call anyone. Yes, we're here. Yes, but the baby is still not breathing. You gotta have his head to back. Okay, what am I doing this?
In Wausau, Wisconsin, Heather and her sister Jessie had spent the day running errands on Thursday, October 18th in 2018. Heather had left her 2 sons with a babysitter. She had a toddler named Jathan and a 2-month-old baby boy named Benson. The woman and her sister went to pick up the kids that night. Jessie checked up on Benson. He had been fast asleep in his car seat carrier, bundled up in a snowsuit and blankets, ever since they'd picked him up from the babysitter. Or so they thought. As the aunt moved around some of the blankets from her nephew's face, her hand brushed up against his cheek, and it was ice cold. Something was wrong. Jessie immediately alerted Heather, and together they struggled to get Benson out of the carrier. His body felt stiff. He wasn't waking up. His eyes weren't opening. As Jessie called 911, Heather started performing CPR on her child. Although officers were quick to arrive on scene, there was nothing they could do for the infant. He was unresponsive. Amidst all the commotion, you can hear Heather say, "This girl killed my baby." If that was the case, why hadn't the babysitter said anything when Heather came to pick her kids up? That's what Detective Jennifer Holes was there to find out. Was this a case of child neglect, either from the parent or from the babysitter? Could it be an unfortunate case of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome? Or was it a situation that was more sinister than anyone could imagine? The babysitter's name is Marissa Teetsort. At the time, she was a 28-year-old mother of 5 and currently expecting her 6th child. Heather met her through a coworker, and Marissa had actually watched her kids a few times before. Plus, Marissa had kids of her own, so Heather figured she was good with kids. As Detective Holes pressed the women for details, they both admitted that something seemed to be off with Marissa. In the past, when Heather would pick up her kids, she'd come in the house and help Marissa pack up the kids' things and chat with her. This time, however, Marissa was pretty brisk when she handed the kids off. Jessie also admitted that just after she'd called emergency services, she texted Marissa, "You killed my sister's baby." But Jessie's suspicions weren't far off, because later, when paramedics assessed the scene, their reports led law enforcement to believe that the child had actually passed several hours earlier. Whatever had happened to Benson had been when he was under the care of Marissa. Detective Holes was able to contact Marissa's service provider, and they helped track her phone's location. Thankfully, it was still in the area, at the Plaza Hotel, so they headed there next.
Morning, Adam.
Morning.
Is Marissa here?
What are you guys doing here?
Please, Adam, just cooperate with us, okay? We'll explain everything in a second.
Well, you already charged her. What the f?
Adam, stay here.
No. You guys are harassing the hell out of us. And she already got charged. We'll be in court. Why you gotta come here?
Well, because we need to talk to her about something new.
Something new?
Yep. Marissa, I need you to wake up. Why are you guys here?
Because we wanted to get away. We got
From what?
everything. Isn't it against the law to come stay at a hotel room for the night?
It was Marissa's boyfriend, Adam, who answered, and his tone made it clear he was not happy to see them. When they asked for Marissa, Adam tried to shoo the authorities away, shouting, "We said we'd be in court tomorrow." He was referring to another case that Marissa was being charged for, and guess what? It also involved child abuse charges. Nonetheless, Marissa decided to play dumb, feigning confusion as she stepped out for questioning. Meanwhile, another detective stayed with Adam in the hotel room. He'd been out hunting for most of it, but when he got home, Adam said all the kids were asleep. Then later, he and Marissa and the kids went to McDonald's together for dinner. Afterwards, they returned to the house and Heather picked them up. At this time, it seemed like Adam had no idea why the police were there or that Benson had died. When the officer informed Adam of what had happened, his reaction seemed genuine. He seemed freaked out and on the verge of tears. When Marissa stepped outside to speak with Detective Holes and Graham, she asked what was going on. When Detective Holes brought up Heather and Benson, Marissa didn't even flinch. She laughed. She blamed it on sleep deprivation. Detective Holes brought up that Marissa had to have known because Jesse had sent her a text from Heather's phone informing her what happened. Then Marissa claimed that her phone was off. If her phone had been off, her cell phone company wouldn't have been able to locate her. It was clear that Marissa was hiding something. She said they all went out to eat at McDonald's. However, this is when her story differs from Adam's. She said Adam never touched Benson. It was her who got him out of the car, and she said she even fed Benson when they were there. Later, police reviewed security camera footage from the McDonald's, and while it did indeed show Marissa, Adam, and the kids in the fast food place, she never took Benson out of the car seat carrier. It was clear to the detectives that this woman had some hand in the passing of the 2-month-old boy. They just didn't know how. It wasn't until Detective Holes suggested that maybe Benson's death had been an accident that Marissa started cooperating. She said he could have died in his sleep when she put him down for a nap. She went to check on him just before Adam came home and confessed that he felt cold and he was on his stomach face down. Although she was adamant that she hadn't killed him, when the detectives asked if she'd tried to do CPR, Marissa flatly said no and that she didn't know how. Instead, what she did was put him in a snowsuit and put a hat on him to deliberately hide any signs that he was dead. She said she didn't tell Adam either. Since Marissa said that Benson's death could have occurred while he was sleeping, the police had Marissa bring them to the house so they could investigate further. She showed them the area where he slept, which had a playpen that was equipped with a video baby monitor, which Marissa said she used while he slept so she could watch him without being in the room. She was asked to demonstrate how she'd positioned the infant in the playpen using a doll, and in the footage, it looks almost as if she's suppressing laughter because the doll isn't cooperating as she's trying to move it. On August 2nd, 2018, only 2 months before the incident with Benson, Detective Holes met Marissa for the first time when she was called to investigate the house for a child abuse case. This time, it was for severe head and face injuries an 11-month-old child had sustained when she'd been under the supervision of Marissa. It took about 2 months after the incident for the charges to be filed against Marissa. In fact, Marissa's charges didn't go into effect until October 11th, only 7 days before she watched Heather's kids. In her court order, it actually explicitly stated that Marissa wasn't allowed to babysit children. But Marissa continued to make excuses. She said she'd never let something bad happen to kids. That's when Detective Holes reminded her of yet another incident that happened a year ago, this time involving a 3-month-old. Detective Holes informed Marissa that she was under investigation for child abuse, and because of that, her infant son couldn't stay with her or Adam. A news report had run that broadcasted Marissa's court order and the fact that she wasn't supposed to be around kids. So Marissa sent a text to Heather that said not to tell anyone that she was watching her kids. It's true that Marissa was a mother of 5, but it turns out 4 of those kids had actually been removed from the home by CPS. And the only reason she was still caring for her 5th child was because CPS didn't even know she'd had another kid, or that she was pregnant with her 6th. Even before that, Marissa had a case filed against her by none other than her own boyfriend. In 2010, Adam filed for a temporary restraining order and told investigators that she'd abused their 2 sons. Benson's autopsy reports had come back. Marissa sat in the interrogation room with Detective Holes and Graham, but this time the detectives were done playing Marissa's games. Holes said she knew that everything Marissa had told them the other day was a lie. Benson's autopsy report showed that the cause of death wasn't suffocation or SIDS, but multiple blows to the head, at least 3. The coroner's report also stated that the child had significant injuries to his tailbone due to a significant amount of force being used. Marissa tried to act stunned, and she claimed she had no idea how that would have happened. The detective got closer to Marissa, pressuring her to answer truthfully. And that's when Marissa said, "I didn't throw him. I would never do that." It was almost more like a blurt. At this point in the interrogation, neither of the detectives had said anything about Marissa throwing Benson, so her admission kind of made it sound like that's exactly what she did. It wasn't until they asked her to physically demonstrate what she did that they caught a glimpse of the horror that actually went down. Marissa pantomimed picking up the baby, and it almost looked as if she just dropped the baby into the enclosure, not set down, not placed, but simply let go. She admitted she was frustrated and the child had been about eye level with her when she let him go. The detectives knew that was way too far a drop for any child to take. And then Marissa said he'd actually hit the side of the playpen and started crying. There wasn't any worry or fear in her voice. Again, it was just cold and matter of fact. And she said she just watched him. And by this point, she'd lied to the police so much. Who knew what was true and what she was just saying to manipulate them? After a couple minutes, Marissa said he stopped crying, so she picked him up and put him back in the middle of the playpen. Then she left the room. The detectives were stunned into silence after hearing her so casually admit to what she'd done. And Marissa almost sounded surprised when they told her she was going to go to trial and likely be sentenced to prison. For the first time since she'd been arrested, it seemed like she actually produced real tears. Not for Heather, not for Benson, but for herself. Marissa was charged with first-degree intentional homicide. She was given a $500,000 cash bond and ordered by the judge not to have any contact with children under the age of 18 or any of the victim's immediate family. On top of that, she also had a $250,000 cash bond for the other child abuse case she was charged with. She kept saying, "I love kids and I'm not a monster." But that's not how it works. On the day of her trial, Heather and other family members arrived in sweatshirts with Benson's picture on them and the words "Justice for Benson" written on them. They also set up a GoFundMe page asking for prayers and financial donations to help pay for Benson's funeral expenses as well as the trial. Marissa's defense team argued that because of her past drug use, she'd actually sustained brain damage and couldn't make decisions properly. The judge sentenced Marissa to 37 years in prison for the murder of Benson and 3 more years for child abuse from the case in August. She was also given an additional 20-year extended supervision program once she was released. With cases like the one we heard today, it's important to remember to cherish the times you spend with your loved ones. I'm Brandy, stay safe out there, and thanks for watching Killer Bites.
Today I'm going to tell you about a woman named China Arnold, a young mother who one night had a terrible argument with her spouse over the paternity of their newborn. I think it's safe to say that no argument ends well when alcohol is involved, but the way the night played out for China, in my opinion, and hopefully yours too, was the worst possible outcome. China was born in Dayton, Ohio on March 29th, 1980. But by the time this story takes place, China had a bit of a rap sheet. She was arrested for abducting someone in 2000, and in 2002, she was arrested for forgery. But in 2005, China seemed to be turning her life around and was attending community college in Dayton and was hoping to become a counselor. China was a young mother at just 25. In early August of 2005, she had just had her 4th child, a baby girl she had named Paris. China was living in a housing complex with her children and boyfriend, Terrell Talley. Terrell's income came from selling drugs. On the night of August 30th, 2005, Terrell's sister offered to look after the kids so China and Terrell could have a date night. They had just had their baby girl 28 days prior, so alone time was perfect. They grabbed a bottle of and began drinking it in the park. The conversation quickly soured when Terrell began accusing China about having an affair, and he was questioning whether the baby was even biologically his. Terrell also confessed to China that he had recently slept with their neighbor. That's when things got violent. While they were still at the park, Terrell slapped Paris and pushed her to the ground, and she bit his lip. At this time, there were many drinks in, and they were very intoxicated. Terrell decided to remove himself from the situation and left to go to The Spot, an apartment in their housing complex that he sold drugs out of. China went home, and when Terrell's sister left, her anger continued to grow. And with all that information and in an angry, drunk haze, China figured the only way to get Terrell back was to put the baby in the microwave. The microwave? China closed the microwave door, turned the microwave on, and left the baby inside for 2 minutes. That's actually horrific. After taking Paris out of the microwave, China then took Paris and placed her in a tub of water. China put Paris in clean clothes and laid down next to her on the couch and fell asleep. When Terrell arrived home in the early hours of August 30th, he found China asleep on the couch with the baby sleeping on the couch near her feet. Terrell curled up next to China and also fell asleep. When they awoke to get their other kids ready for school, Terrell finally noticed that Paris wasn't sleeping. China and Terrell frantically rushed baby Paris to the Children's Medical Center. When they arrived, the doctors took her temperature and it was 95 degrees. She was not breathing and her blood pressure didn't even register. It was immediately clear that there was nothing that the doctors could do. Dr. William Matra was the one to examine Paris. He said he immediately saw the baby had visible burns on her face, trunks, and limbs. Paris had been dressed in a clean nightgown, which the doctors had found odd. She had been burned, but there were no burn marks and no leakage. It was like nothing the doctors had ever seen before. When Dr. William Matra asked China about the burns, she responded with a question. "My baby has been burned?" China's story was that she had gotten home around 2 a.m. She said that she had tried to feed Paris, but she didn't want to eat. Then after she tried to feed her, she gently put Paris down into her bassinet in front of the fan. She said it wasn't until they awoke later that morning that Paris wasn't acting right. China said that she got her kids ready for school and onto the bus, and right after that is when Terrell and her had left for the Children's Medical Center with Paris. China and Terrell were taken from the hospital to the police station to be further questioned. At the police station, China began to contradict the story she had told to the doctors. She told police that she had arrived home between 9:30 and 10 p.m., not 2 a.m. She said she laid down on the couch with Paris on her chest and they fell asleep. She said that Paris started to cry around 2:30 in the morning. When the crying woke China up, she decided to make a bottle to feed her and also change Paris's diaper at that time. They then laid down on the couch with Paris on China's chest. When China awoke later that morning, she saw Terrell sleeping next to her, but didn't see Paris and didn't know where Paris was. She said that she thought that Terrell had possibly taken Paris to her room to sleep in her bassinet. Her and Terrell went in for questioning separately, and when it was Terrell's turn, the story was much different than the one that China told. He said that he didn't get home until 3 or 4 in the morning. He went to sleep on the couch next to China, and when he woke up, he saw Paris face down on the couch, deceased. Authorities requested and were granted a search warrant to China and Terrell's apartment. The detective had been told by the coroner that the burns that Paris sustained were caused by a thermal injury. There were parts of Paris's body that were severely burned, while other parts had no burns at all. The detective was looking for a rectangular object, like a heating pad or cooking tin that maybe could have caused these burns. The microwave wasn't even considered because why would anyone assume something so horrific? The detectives went upstairs and saw the plastic tub that China had bathed Paris in. Neighbors were questioned and they told the detectives about Terrell's sister babysitting. When China was questioned for a third time on the same day, she told the police that that was true, but that she had gotten home between 9:30 and 10 o'clock, and she fell asleep with Paris. She reiterated that they awoke at 2:30 in the morning to feed and change Paris. When police asked about the tub they had found, she said that she had given Paris a bath in the afternoon and forgot to empty it. Detectives knew about the argument that China and Terrell had at the park on their date, but China told them that the fight was regarding her driving. She eventually confessed that the fight they had was about the paternity of Paris. Police then told China that the neighbors had told them that they spotted China on her porch around 4 a.m. China said that that was true. She was on the porch and the reason was that she was waiting for Terrell. This was when things changed again. Her story now was that she had been waiting for Terrell to come home because he had taken Paris with him when he left that night to cool down. The authorities asked China why she had not told this in the previous 2 interviews, and her answer was that she loved Terrell very much and was trying to protect him. The police asked China if Paris was returned with burns on her, and China refused to answer the question. China was arrested for child endangerment, but let go a few days later due to the lack of evidence. The doctors ruled that Paris's death was caused by hypothermia, but the case was classified as a homicide. Fast forward to 2006, when the coroner learned of microwave experiments in a study that had come out. The coroner saw the story of a baby that had been put in a microwave in Virginia, and the burns that that baby had sustained were similar to those that Paris had. In May of 2006, detectives went back to the housing complex. Terrell and China no longer lived there, but the microwave was still there. They took the microwave to be examined, and it was then that they discovered the small amounts of DNA from the top of the inside of the microwave that were a match to Paris. Because of her size and her burn pattern that was consistent with the heating of the microwave, it was determined that the microwave was the cause of death. The coroner also stated that the time of death was between 1 and 3 a.m., which would mean that Terrell wasn't there, and now there was enough evidence to convict China of the crime. In November 2006, China was rearrested for the aggravated murder of Paris and was put in jail to await trial. There were 3 trials that took place between 2006 and 2011 because it wasn't explicitly clear that China was the sole person responsible for Paris's death. However, while China was in jail awaiting her first trial, she became romantically involved with her cellmate. The cellmate later testified that China had confessed to her about the murder. There was also another report saying that China had confessed to Terrell that she had placed Paris in the microwave. In February 2008, shortly after China's first trial began, Terrell told the jury that his son had told him that he was the one that pulled Paris's lifeless body out of the microwave after a neighbor's boy had put her inside. Because of this new information, the judge declared a mistrial. During the second trial, the mother of the child that was said to have placed the baby in the microwave was able to prove that her son was not at the housing complex when Paris died. China was then convicted of aggravated murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And on September 8th, 2008, she was incarcerated at the Dayton Correctional Institution. But just 2 years later, on November 5th, 2010, the Ohio 2nd District Court of Appeals reversed China's conviction, citing prosecutorial misconduct, and stated that the court erred by not allowing material witnesses to testify in her defense. So then there was a third trial. During this trial, China's attorney argued that the evidence pointed out as much to Terrell as it did to her, but that argument failed to convince the jury. On May 13, 2011, the jury found her guilty of aggravated murder. On May 20th, Arnold was again sentenced to life in prison without parole, with both the jury and judge rejecting the death penalty option. China did not agree with this sentence because her attorney stated that they would be appealing the decision. In September 2013, China's lawyer requested a new trial in the 2nd District Court of Appeals, claiming that there were multiple errors made in her case. In December 2013, the 2nd District Court of Appeals said that the decision was correct and affirmed the conviction. Then an appeal regarding China's life sentence was made, citing constitutional questions about double jeopardy because she was tried more than once for the same crime. Her attorney asked the Ohio Supreme Court to reverse the 2nd District Court of Appeals decision and to send the case back to court for resentencing. But in May of 2014, the Ohio Supreme Court decided not to take up the appeal. China is still in prison and will remain there without the possibility of parole.
Welcome to another episode of Killer Bites. I'm your host, Lucy, and today I'll be telling you the tragic story of a troubled mother, a discarded infant, and a miraculous recovery.
Hello, 911.
We had just found an infant child.
Is it breathing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
The middle of the mall, behind the mall, the House Buffet.
Okay. Is it clothed? Does the baby have any clothes on?
Yes, it is making noise.
Okay. Do you have a blanket?
It is a boy, and he is still alive, I believe. He looks pretty good.
Do you have a blanket or something you can wrap him in?
Yes, ma'am. He was in a blanket.
Okay. Can I have your name?
Huh?
Can I have your name, please?
He looks like he's in good health, actually.
Okay. Can I have your name?
He still got his umbilical cord, she said.
Okay. Can I get your name?
Michael Green.
A phone number?
I don't, you'll have to wait the passengers moving, or the driver's moving his truck But no, hold on 1 second. But we are behind the mall.
You're behind the mall?
Yeah, right here behind Hobbs Buffet.
Okay. And that's the corner of...
Yes, ma'am. Hobbs Buffet, Old First. Hobbs, New Mexico.
Okay. Have you covered him in a blanket?
He is in a blanket. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Is he crying?
He's whimpering. He was not crying, actually.
Okay. Did you see anyone in the area?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Anyone else there with you?
Hold on. I'll let you talk to the man that has on the phone. Hold on.
Okay.
Hello?
Hello? Did you find the baby?
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I do a bit. He told you can hurry. The baby, we want a baby here.
Behind the first cafeteria?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you find the baby?
Yes, ma'am. I was looking for some stuff in the dumpster, and we heard, we heard something. I didn't know it was a baby, so I thought it was a baby cat. And we dig in, and then we found the baby.
Okay, can you tell me how he's doing right now? I need to know about the baby.
Okay, I see with my girl. He's in the truck.
He's in the truck with your girlfriend?
Yes.
What kind of truck? What color?
I'm right here behind the first secretary.
Okay. Can you go? I need to know if the baby's breathing.
Yes, I do.
Okay, is he crying?
Okay, hurry up.
I get the officers and the medics are on the way, okay? Another dispatcher already has them on the way. My questions are just for them before they arrive.
Oh, okay. Hello?
Hello?
Hello, yes, ma'am.
Can you tell me about the baby?
He's still got his available cord. He's freezing cold, and he's very, he's drained, he's very, very, very weak.
Okay. Do you have him wrapped in a blanket and the heater on?
I got him in my jacket. I took that wet towel that was rounded off of him. There are the cops. We got him.
Okay, you got the cops?
Yes, ma'am.
And you said he was wrapped in a towel?
Yeah.
I'm going to let you go so you can speak to the officer. Bye.
It all started on a cold evening in Hobbs, New Mexico, on the night of January 7th, 2022. A group of people were huddled around a dumpster behind Broadmoor Shopping Center looking for food to eat, when all of a sudden, they heard a whimper. They thought nothing of it at first, assuming it was a stray cat, and continued on. It was only after a bit that the woman of the group discovered that it was a baby. Not just a baby, but a newborn baby inside of a trash bag. It was at this point that they decided to call 911. They needed help, and if this baby was going to have any chance of surviving, it would need paramedics immediately. On the 911 call, 2 men and 1 woman, Michael Green, Hector Gesso, and April Meadow, detail what they have found to the operator on the other line. It's a little chaotic at first, with just 1 man on the line. He states, "We just found a baby in a dumpster." He tells the operator that at first they thought it was a cat and then realized it was a baby. When the operator asks about the state of the baby, the man tells her that he's alive and looks okay. He asks for her to send someone urgently and that they need to hurry up. He then passes the phone to his friend, who tells the female 911 operator that they found the baby wrapped in a blanket and that his girlfriend says that the baby's umbilical cord is still on, revealing to the officer that this is indeed a newborn. He also let them know that the baby was a boy. On the phone, once the phone is passed to the woman, the 911 operator gets a clearer picture of what is going on. She tells the operator that the baby is not in a blanket, but rather a bloody, wet towel. She then reports that the baby is gray, freezing cold, and seems to be struggling to breathe. The operator asks if they are able to keep the baby warm. The woman responds, saying that she is keeping it warm with her coat and is in a truck with the heater on. But she pleads with the operator to rush, letting her know the baby is very, very weak. The first man then comes back on the phone and begs for them to hurry, fearful that the baby will die if they do not get there in the next few minutes. He quickly hangs up when he sees the police have arrived. We got them. A sigh of relief for the people who very well saved this baby's life. When Officer Maxwell got to the scene, he would later describe in his testimony in court that the child had a bruise on his head and that he could barely move. He had blood all over him, and it looked like he had dirt or grass in his hair. The police would then gather DNA samples from Michael, Hector, and April to officially confirm that it was not one of their children and release them. The baby boy was then taken to the hospital, and when he arrived, according to nurses, he was severely anemic and his temperature was too low to even register. He was suffering from dehydration, anemia, and hypothermia. Once the case was under investigation by law enforcement, it didn't take them very long to figure out exactly how this poor innocent baby ended up in a dumpster. Surveillance footage of the dumpster about 6 hours earlier was the key to helping them find out what happened. The footage reveals a white car pulling up to the same dumpster around 2 p.m. that day. A woman gets out of the driver's seat, opens the back car door, and removes a black trash bag. She then proceeds to take the bag and toss it casually and swiftly into the dumpster. The woman then gets back inside the car and promptly drives away. 6 hours later, in freezing cold temperatures, the baby boy was found by the men and woman digging through the dumpster. The footage provided by one of the mall stores was able to reveal a partial license plate on the white car, which then led police to the mother, Alexis Avila, who was quickly brought into the police station for questioning with Detective Daniel Perez. Police first went to Alexis's parents' house where she lives. Alexis Avila, the mother, was at the time only 18 years of age, still in high school, and worked as a part-time sales associate. Her parents were informed of the incident and agreed to bring their daughter down to the police station for questioning. Before the interrogation began, Alexis asked if her mother could be in the room. Unfortunately for Alexis, because she had just turned 18 and was now a legal adult, that was not allowed. She would be treated and tried as a legal adult. Perez first asks Alexis if she requires any medical attention. She denies any. He then reads Alexis her rights and reminds her that she has a right to an attorney. However, Alexis refuses and says she's fine talking to the detective on her own. Perez starts off the interrogation by telling Alexis that he is in no place to judge and that he is aware that there are always two sides to every story. He reminds her that we are all humans. It's in doing this that he's hoping Alexis will open up and be comfortable enough to tell the truth about what happened. But he's also hoping for an admission of guilt and ideally a reason as to why she did what she did. He tells her that he's looking for the truth. The interview starts off slow, with Alexis being quite vague. Perez tries to get her to reveal what happened and why she's here, but she's slow to respond, avoiding and not exactly answering his questions. Perez reveals to Alexis that he knows she was pregnant. He also tells her that he's aware that she knew she was pregnant, but Alexis immediately denies this. She says that she didn't know that information until yesterday, and before that she was unaware that she was pregnant. The detective seems confused as to how that's possible. Alexis says that she just thought she was gaining weight because she was eating more. Additionally, Alexis goes on to say that she had previously been in an accident in September 2020. This accident had caused her to have severe back pain. According to Alexis, this back pain comes and goes, so she had ignored that pain thinking it was related to that, saying, "I didn't think anything of it." She then admits to having gone to the ER for this back pain with her mother, but says that they told her that she had a sprain and that was it. They gave her medicine for it and she left. She even admits to a urine sample, but claims nothing came from it. It's also unclear when this ER visit was, as she does not provide the date. At this point in the interview, she's pandering. She says she went to a clinic yesterday for her back pain again, that time the doctors collected a urine sample, and that's how she discovered she was pregnant. As Perez questions Alexis throughout the interrogation, Alexis continues to seem confused and scared, at times even unfazed or disconnected. Detached could be another word used to describe her behavior, as she's continually questioned by Perez as to what happened. Perez continues to probe Alexis. He asks her to take him through her day, step by step, asking questions like, what did she do when she woke up? Alexis focuses for a long time on her pain. She tells Perez that she couldn't sleep the night before and was up all night with stomach pain. She apparently thought she was constipated. At one point that morning, her father even went out and got her medicine for it. After she took the medicine, she then went back to bed. This goes on for a while as she repeatedly tells the detective that she had unrelenting pain and that she thought it was constipation. Alexis says that she had not gone to school all week due to the pain. Perez reminds Alexis that not only does he know that she was pregnant, but he's aware that she gave birth. So he wants to know what happened with that. This is when she starts talking more and detailing the birth. Alexis finally started to give some answers to Perez. She tells him that she gave birth in the bathroom of her parents' home. She was shocked and scared and didn't know what to do, and in a panic, Alexis confesses to wrapping the baby in a towel. This towel would be the same one that the 3 people who found the baby would find him in, wet and with dried blood. But what she described next, Perez would not be able to comprehend. Alexis admitted to having 2 trash bags. She said that her car was messy and that she placed the baby inside of one of the trash bags and tied it up with a hair tie. When Perez seems confused and shocked by the hair tie along with her other actions, Alexis tries to defend herself by claiming that the hair tie was on the verge of breaking, so she doubts it would have even stayed on. Later on, when Perez would be questioned about the whereabouts of the hair tie in court, he would say they never did find one. Alexis then walks Perez through how she decided to go to the mall. She says that she was terrified and had no idea what to do, that she had only just turned 18. So she put the baby inside of a trash bag, tied it with a hair tie, and put it in the backseat of her car. This means that the newborn was not only inside of the trash bag at this point, but loosely lying on the back seat with no car seat, no protection at all while Alexis was driving. She then proceeded to drive around thinking about what to do. until she drove to the back of JCPenney at the mall. This is where her story meets the surveillance footage. Alexis says that she stopped the car, got out, and put the trash bag with her baby in it inside of the garbage can. Perez asks her to describe the garbage can and gets her to admit that it was a dumpster. At this point, he's still trying to see remorse or a path as to why she would have decided to do this. He then asks her how she placed the baby into the dumpster. Alexis is open with this question and confesses that she tossed the bag in, which is exactly what the footage reveals her doing. The interview is now coming to a close, but Perez is still searching for any logic or reasoning as to why she did this. She says, "There's a baby in front of me and I'm in a panic. I'm 18. The same reaction she's given throughout most of this interview. Perez gets harsh now with Alexis, telling her that what she did is not normal behavior and that no reasonable person would have acted the way she did. He will not indulge her actions. It's important to note that Alexis says she did all of this without her parents knowing. Going to the clinic, leaving the house, driving around, etc. Decisions she made on her own. She's insistent that she did not involve anyone else in all of this. Perez asks Alexis multiple times throughout the interview why she did not ask for help. Alexis always answers with the same response. I was scared. He's confused as to what she thinks would have happened if she had called paramedics or reached out to law enforcement. To which Alexis just replies, I don't know. Perez asks Alexis about what occurred after she had tossed her child in the trash. Alexis said that afterwards she didn't know what to do, so she drove around for a few hours and then went home and just lay down on her bed. Perez then throws a curveball at Alexis. He tells her that he spoke to friends of hers that claim she knew she was pregnant as early as March. At this point, Alexis appears to get caught in a lie and admits that she might have known before yesterday that she was pregnant, but she didn't know for sure. Perez is unsure what this means. This is when Alexis finally admits to knowing that she knew she was pregnant earlier. Alexis remembers having taken 2 pregnancy tests. She says that one was negative and one was positive. However, she chose to ignore the positive one. She'd taken these tests after having watched a TikTok trend and decided to try it. When Perez pushes further, she says that it was around August that she thinks she took the test. Alexis also claims to have still received her menstrual period every month, so she had no idea that she would have been pregnant. During the trial, however, Alexis is unwavering in her claim that she did not know she was pregnant until the day before she gave birth. Perez tells Alexis that he's aware that the cops were sent to her parents' house earlier this year in June. Alexis doesn't respond and seems confused by this. Apparently, Alexis's mother had called 911 after getting suicidal messages from her daughter and was concerned about her mental state. Alexis doesn't seem to remember this either. As the interview is concluding, Perez asks Alexis directly about her choice to discard her child. He questions if she just figured that she would be better off without it, at which point she changes her attitude. It's a shift in how she's acted the rest of the interview. Alexis says she actually doesn't think money would be an issue for her as she has a stable job, school, and a place to live. She then utters a shocking statement. She tells Perez that if the baby is okay and survived, then she would like custody of it. Perez then concludes the interview. While awaiting trial, Alexis was put on house arrest at her parents' home. It was during this time that Alexis asked for permission to visit with her child. That request was quickly denied by a judge. There was a pre-trial that took place in February 2022, but the official trial took place over 3 days in April of 2023. Multiple people were brought up to the stand, including Alexis herself, her ex-boyfriend and father of the baby, her mother, the doctor who diagnosed Alexis, and Detective Perez. Over the next few days, a jury would hear from all sides and have to determine if Alexis was to go to prison on child abuse and attempted murder charges. Perez's entire interview with Alexis on January 7th was played for the jury during the trial. This footage was brought up multiple times during Alexis's testimony and would be a key point in the trial. During the trial, Judge William Shoebridge reminded Alexis that had it not been for luck and the grace of God, this case would not have been a case of endangerment, but rather a murder case. Dr. Susan B. Cave, a forensic and clinical psychologist, was brought up to the stand after Detective Perez. It is here where she testifies that after evaluating Alexis, she believed that she is not only bipolar, but that she has a mood disorder as well. This mood disorder was one that she described could affect people so that they have heightened lows and extreme highs. Dr. Cave also pointed out that during pregnancy, Alexis would have experienced hormonal changes, and these changes could affect her disorders significantly, and even went as far as to say that it would amplify it, that in certain cases you cannot be controlled by the rational part of the mind. According to Medical News Today, bipolar 1 disorder can cause delusion, euphoria, and overactivity, including periods of manic episodes that can last up to a week. This could potentially cause one to not remember how they acted during the time of a manic episode. In fact, when Alexis's mother was brought to the stand, she said that if her daughter was in her right mind, she wouldn't have done this. She was insistent that this was not her daughter. It was not the person that she knew. The prosecutor then brought up the father of the child, Stephen Astorga, Alexis's ex-boyfriend, whom she said she had dated for a year and a half. It was during questioning that Stephen made a surprising statement. He told the courtroom that he had been made aware of the pregnancy. Furthermore, he said that he had seen the positive pregnancy test with his own eyes. He told the courtroom he'd known since April of 2021, and he says that they broke up in August of that same year. However, while being questioned by Alexis's attorney, she brings up an important distinction. Alexis brings up an important distinction. She mentions that previously and during the pre-trial, Stephen, the father, had stated that he had not known about the pregnancy. However, today in court, he has now changed his answer, saying he knew as early as April. Stephen nods his head and confirms that he is changing his answer. When asked by Mark Pravasco, the prosecutor, if he and Alexis had discussed next steps or what they would do with the positive results of the pregnancy test, Stephen responds no. A bit of an odd answer. Stephen points out that when Alexis showed him, they were at his parents' house and they were both home, so there wasn't much time and it wasn't the place to discuss it. However, he confirms that they also never discussed it further after that day, although he did tell one of his friends at school about it. Stephen then told the jury that he and Alexis had continued their relationship for 2 more months after he had found out the results of the pregnancy test. He says that he had continued to go to school like usual while Alexis was in and out of school. She was a senior at the time while he was a junior. When asked about the current health of the baby, Stephen said that the baby is in good health, that he only has a possible heart murmur that they are monitoring, as well as slight asthma. Alexis's attorney later on in the trial clarifies that Stephen also has asthma, insinuating that the child could have inherited it rather than acquiring the health condition from being outside in the cold. It is then Alexis's turn to be brought up to the stand for questioning. Alexis's attorney, Ibukan Abepoju, started off by going over the events of January 4th, which was the date of Alexis's first visit to the ER. This occurred 3 days before the day of the birth. Alexis states that she had gone in under the supervision of her mother due to her consistent back pain, the same back pain that she'd been dealing with since her accident in 2020. Alexis says this was normal pain that she had been dealing with multiple times a week. She says, like she had previously stated in her interview with Perez, that doctors then sent her home with medication and told her that she had a strain. They moved on then to the day of January 6th, the day before the incident. Alexis then tells the courtroom that she goes into the doctor again, alone this time and without her mother, and sees a different doctor. It's at this appointment that she says they decided to collect a urine sample after she described her pain to them. The doctor then came up to Alexis and told her that she was pregnant. Alexis says that she blacked out at this point in the visit and doesn't remember what else happened. The term blacked out will be used many times throughout Alexis's testimony. When asked if she was given any information during this visit about her pregnancy, she claims that she was not told anything about it. She was only instructed to stop taking the medication that she was previously prescribed for the back pain. That same evening, the night of January 6th, Alexis tells the courtroom that she saw her family for a gathering. She did not reveal to anyone at that gathering what the doctor had told her, and she did not disclose her pregnancy to any family members at this point in time. She's then asked if she knew that she would give birth the next day, and Alexis says no, absolutely not. Alexis is firm during the trial that she did not know she was pregnant until the day before she gave birth, contradicting what the father, Stephen, had testified earlier, claiming that Alexis had shown him a positive pregnancy test in April of that year. According to Alexis, she knew Stephen was the father because he was the only person she'd ever been with. There had been rumors around school that Alexis was pregnant. In a text chain shown in court, texts are shown in which schoolmates of Alexis claim that she had lied about not knowing that she was pregnant and instead was talking about it at school. Her attorney attempted to claim that this was just hearsay and that it was normal for teenagers to gossip and speculate. Alexis agreed, stating that they were just rumors, not confirmed. Prior to these doctor's appointments, her attorney asks Alexis what else had been going on in her life. She says that she was a senior in high school and preparing for college and prom. She thought that she wanted to study psychology and maybe teaching. This is potentially an attempt to normalize Alexis's life and that she had other things on her mind. Her attorney finally addresses the day of January 7th, the day that Alexis gave birth and had tossed her baby into the dumpster. Alexis's parents had gone to work that morning and she was just home alone. She once again, just like she did with Perez, tells the court that she felt she needed to go to the restroom and had been constipated. After she's questioned as to what happened next, Alexis admits to delivering the baby. However, she doesn't seem to remember details after that. She says, "I just remember sitting there and then the baby was on the toilet or on the floor. I don't remember." When asked to specify where the baby was after she gave birth, the toilet bowl or on the floor, she repeats the same phrase that she does not remember. Alexis says that she was in shock, wondering how it could have happened. Alexis maintains that prior to leaving the police station and going to the hospital with her mother, she doesn't remember anything that happened. She blacked out. She only remembers leaving the police department with her mom, not the interview with Detective Perez. This is when her and her mother left the police station and were on the way to the hospital hospital to get her checked out. Alexis says that when she was in the car with her mother, her mom had been trying to understand what happened. She continued to ask Alexis the same questions. For example, why didn't you tell me? And do you know what is happening? Her mother was unaware of the pregnancy. In the conversation with her mother in the car, Alexis says she was surprised after hearing what had happened. She says she remembered thinking that it didn't sound like something she would do, and that was not who she was. They never made it to the hospital and instead turned around and went home. As a matter of fact, Alexis said that she wasn't able to comprehend what had happened for a couple of months. She says that the only way she has been able to do this is through therapy. She describes watching the footage of her with Perez on January 7th as looking at a ghost. That was not me. Alexis asked if she now understood through the course of the trial and through all the testimonies the effect that her actions had on her baby. Alexis responded that she understood. She said it hurt to hear about it. When probed as to what hurt her exactly, she says that listening to what happened to the baby is what hurt. She's aware that he will always have this with him and will not ever forget it. She said, "This is something that will live with him for the rest of his life, as well as myself." Alexis apologized for her actions. She said that was not her and not in her character. It's not the person she is. She regrets ever putting her child in harm's way, telling the jury, "I regret that he will always have this in the back of his head and will think I do not love him because that's what he'll read and hear." She ends her statement by telling the jury that she truly loves her child. After being questioned by her attorney if she'd have changed how she acted that day and done anything differently, Alexis responded that she would have done absolutely everything differently. She tells her attorney during the testimony that she doesn't recall or remember any of the preliminary hearings in February 2022. Alexis states that she has blacked out before the incident of January 7th, that this was something that has happened to her a few times before. However, she can't remember when. She then attempts to describe to the courtroom what being blackout means to her. She explains, "It's like I'm not in my body. I'm a ghost. I'm in my body, but I'm not." This is how she remembers being during most of the day on January 7th and throughout the preliminary hearings in February of 2022. One of the most interesting parts of the testimony is that Alexis is not an only child with a small family, but rather she has a quite large family. She has one brother and one sister. She tells the court that her sister has 2 children, one on the way, and her brother has 4 children. She's an aunt to a total of 6 nieces and nephews, showing that Alexis was used to being around children, so why didn't she request help? It's unclear. On April 14th, 2023, the jury was sent out to deliberate, and within 3 hours they returned with a verdict, a guilty verdict. They charged Alexis with child abuse resulting in great bodily harm and attempted first-degree murder. Alexis appeared to be fighting back tears during this reading of the verdict, knowing her life was about to change forever. Who knows what could have happened if she had reached out for help, told her mother, or law enforcement. On the other hand, could she have been in a mental state that caused her to disassociate? It's unknown. This case opened up questions about whether the safe haven law was something that was causing good rather than more damage. The safe haven law states that in the case of a child who is younger than 90 days old, a parent is able to leave the infant in a safe area. Doing this will not result in any criminal consequences. This law was implemented and passed after a series of cases in New Mexico in which babies were left to be abandoned, much like Alexis's. So New Mexico lawmakers decided to expand this program in 2022 in an effort to help the cause. Hobbs, the same location where Alexis left her baby, will now acquire a box as well. Other states have followed suit, Florida being the next to potentially implement this program, as they are in the middle of considering this legislation. Ibukan Adepoju, Alexis's public defender, made a statement after Alexis was convicted. She said that when Alexis is released from prison, she will be 34 years old. Because of that, she and her team will work to ensure that Alexis has access to tools such as educational resources and therapy to help pave a path for her when she's released, in hopes of giving her a meaningful life. Ibukan also argued that Alexis's actions were not premeditated and instead were a direct cause of her mental health, her bipolar disorder, and nothing more. That she had been detached from her feelings and disassociated. This, however, did not affect the outcome, as the jury still saw that Alexis had put her child in harm's way regardless of her mental state at the time. Additionally, Mark Probasco, prosecuting attorney during the sentencing, in a statement tells the judge that the state determined that Alexis continued to show little to no remorse surrounding her actions. Ibukan told the court that she believed Alexis was not cold-blooded, rather that she needed help to sort out her mental health. On May 1st, 2023, Alexis Avila had her official sentencing. The judge sentenced Alexis to 18 years in prison with 2 years of parole. That being said, the judge then suspended 2 years off her sentence. This was due to her mental illness and her age. Judge William Shoebridge spoke harshly to Alexis, making her aware of just how serious the actions she took were during her sentencing. "You've given yourself a life sentence of knowing what you did with your child," he told her, "and you've also given your son that same life sentence, and that is probably something that is as hard to deal with as any length of time that you may have in prison." The judge went on to tell Alexis that the crime she had committed was unforgivable. Alexis relayed to the judge that she hoped to learn how to cope with her anxiety and stress and would like to be able to handle her emotions in a healthier way. She expressed remorse for having missed out on the important first first year of her son's life. She regrets having denied him motherly love. The one positive in this story is that the child ended up miraculously surviving, especially considering the harsh conditions that he had faced immediately after birth and for almost 6 hours afterwards. If it had not been for those 3 people, he most certainly would have died. The boy was named Saul after his paternal grandfather. He's now in the custody of his father, Stephen Astorga, Alexis's ex-boyfriend, and his extended family. He's a happy baby, and we can only hope that as he grows older, he continues to be loved and supported by those around him. As for Alexis, she is trying her best to be a better person and learn from her mistakes, taking parenting classes, seeking psychological help and treatment for her mental illness, and bettering herself so that when she is released from prison, she might have a chance at a new life. That's our story for today. I'm Lucy, and thanks again for tuning in to another episode of Killer Bites. For all things true crime, like and subscribe to our channel, Killer Bites.
I just woke up. My dog woke me up on the couch. I have a 2-year-old and I have a 2-week-old. And my 2-week-old is not in her sleeper. Her passy's on the floor.
She's not in her sleeper?
She's not in her sleeper. She's not here. I've looked everywhere. I've looked under clothes and everything.
What's your address, ma'am?
Yes, lot 31.
Do you think somebody took her, ma'am?
My 2-year-old says she's gone, and I've looked everywhere in the house, so I don't know another possibility.
Okay. And you said you were sleeping, woke up, and she was gone?
Yes. My 2-year-old came and woke me up. That's how it was on the couch.
How old is she, ma'am?
2 weeks old.
Okay. And who else would have come in your house?
I mean, as far as I know, nobody would have came in my house. My 2-year-old says Papa, but I called my dad and I called my grandparents, and they don't have her. My dad's on the way here now.
All right. How long have you been asleep?
The last time I woke up with her was around, I guess, 5 maybe.
Okay, so the only thing that's missing is her and her blanket.
Yeah.
You didn't talk to the dad or grandma or anybody
Her
else?
dad was here with me. Dad just left, and he's walking around the park looking for her. Because my 2-year-old just, I asked her, did somebody come in and take her? And she said, yeah, but she's 2, so I don't know if I can prove that or not.
Did you look through everything, like under the bed?
Yes,
the
ma'am.
bathroom?
Yes, ma'am.
Christopher McNabb and Courtney Bell chose over their own children. This couple, who also happened to be first cousins, wanted the police to believe their daughter had gone missing and that they had nothing to do with it. The reality was, they were attempting to cover up an unthinkable crime. On the morning of October 7th, 2018, 15-day-old Kalaya seemingly disappeared from her crib inside her parents' trailer park home in Covington, Georgia. Mother Courtney Bell quickly called 911. When dispatchers answered, they weren't greeted by a frantic mother desperately pleading for help, but a woman seemingly more concerned with establishing a narrative, one that painted her as guilt-free in her daughter's disappearance. The 911 call from the residents of Christopher McNabb and Courtney Bell immediately raised suspicions. With Kalia being a tiny infant, there was simply no way she could have exited the home herself. This meant that law enforcement were looking for both Kalia and the culprit. By the time police arrived at the scene and began to search for the missing baby girl, Christopher McNabb had already searched areas of the nearby forest. The man with the heavily tattooed face was sure to let officers in on this fact upon greeting them. This would later appear to be McNabb's attempt at steering the officers clear of any areas in the woodland that McNabb had recently visited. Police then searched the trailer where Kalia's parents lived. There were no signs of violence, no signs of forced entry, and no signs of blood. When Christopher McNabb and Courtney Bell were questioned, they each claimed that they had last seen Kalia after putting her back to bed after a late-night feeding session. This was reportedly around 5 a.m. As the search continued, both McNabb and Bell left the area with friends. Sometime after, investigators discovered a drawstring sports bag stuffed underneath some logs in the forest behind the trailer park where McNabb and Bell lived. Once they looked inside the bag, they made a truly horrifying discovery: the body of baby Kalia. She had been beaten to death with an unknown object and then hidden in the forest. She was found wrapped in a purple onesie and a white tank top belonging to her father. Once word reached Christopher McNabb that Kalia had been found, McNabb reportedly grew hysterical. claiming that the murder would now be pinned on him. He made these statements before asking if his daughter had been found alive or dead. If McNabb had been innocent, there was almost no reason for him to jump to the conclusion that Kalia had been killed. Had he been innocent, then in his mind, there would have been a chance that Kalia was still alive. When the opportune moment for escape presented itself during a stop at an intersection, McNabb fled the car that he and his girlfriend were in. For a short while, Christopher McNabb was a suspect on the run, but it didn't take police long to track him down and arrest him at a nearby gas station car wash. Courtney Bell stayed in the vehicle with her friend, but she was reportedly in no rush to get to her recently discovered daughter. Courtney Bell instead insisted on a visit to Anderson Circle, a neighborhood notorious for usage. Courtney being in no rush to tend to her daughter was seemingly a frequent occurrence. It had become a trend during Kalia's tragically short life. 2 days after Kalia was born, her mother Courtney was discharged from the hospital. Kalia remained in the hospital for a further 2 days before being picked up by her parents. Just 3 days after that, Courtney was already leaving her newborn baby with family members. When she did so, she did not reveal to her family where she was going or why she needed them to care for Kalia. The most likely explanation is that Courtney Bell was neglecting her daughter in order to fulfill her Kalia only lived for 15 days, and yet for 8 of those days, she was away from her parents. This does not change the fact that little Kalia went from the hospital into a home of filth, squalor, and violence. The trailer home of McNabb and Bell was reportedly filthy and unfit for both Kalia and her 2-year-old sister to live in. McNabb had also been known to physically abuse Courtney Bell. This is something McNabb's lawyers would eventually admit during trial. There are multiple theories as to what really happened the night and morning of Kalia's death. Her autopsy revealed severe blunt force trauma. Kalia's skull was beaten in, though there was no open wound. This explains why the police found no blood inside the trailer where McNabb and Bell lived. Both parents had used meth the evening that Kalia died. It's possible that both McNabb and Bell fell asleep, and when they were awakened by the baby's cries, they inflicted a sickening attack on the infant in order to silence them. This was likely inflicted at the hands of Christopher McNabb. After the unforgivable beating, either McNabb or Bell, or perhaps both, then took Kalia's lifeless body and hid it in the forest nearby. Some speculate that this step may have been performed by Courtney Bell alone, and that she specifically wrapped Kalia's body inside one of McNabb's shirts in an attempt to position him as the killer. This is not confirmed, though judging by Courtney Bell's behavior, including the strange statements she made during the 911 call, it seems that she was well aware of her daughter's demise by the time she dialed the number for emergency services. In 2019, Christopher McNabb was found guilty of malice murder, felony murder, murder in the 2nd degree, and aggravated battery, along with cruelty to children in the 1st and 2nd degree, and concealing the death of another. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Christopher McNabb maintained that he had nothing to do with his infant's death. When it came time for sentencing, McNabb continued to show no remorse and insist upon his innocence. He argued that just because he struggled with what he described as domestic issues with his partner, it did not mean he was capable of harming his own children. The judge responsible for McNabb's sentencing then asked the then 28-year-old what sentence he would hand down to the man or woman guilty of Kalia's murder. McNabb responded by saying that if they are ever caught, they deserve to be behind bars. The judge then asked McNabb if they would deserve the maximum sentence. When Christopher McNabb answered yes, the judge sentenced McNabb to the maximum sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lead prosecutor Layla Zahn made it clear that she did not buy Christopher McNabb's version of events. All this fake crying and fake tears he did during the interviews about how much he loved his children and that he did in the courtroom are a joke, Layla Zahn. As for Courtney Bell, the then 25-year-old mother was convicted of 2nd-degree murder, 2nd-degree child cruelty, and contributing to the dependency of a minor. Bell admitted that she put her desire for drugs ahead of her own daughter, but that she did not have anything to do with Kalia's murder. "It's a sickness, but I tried to be a good mama. I love my babies. Y'all know I didn't do this." Courtney Bell. She was sentenced to 30 years, the first 15 of which were to be served in prison, and the following 15 to be served on probation. Bell's 2nd-degree murder and 2nd-degree child cruelty charges were overturned in 2022 due to insufficient evidence. While Courtney Bell was not directly responsible for Kalia's horrific death, her behavior in the days leading up to that October night in 2017, which included and leaving both of her children unsupervised did play a part in Kalia's demise. Her felony conviction was not overturned, and so Courtney Bell will spend 10 years in prison for the conviction of contributing to the dependency of a minor. She will be eligible for release after serving that time. Christopher McNabb, on the other hand, will die in prison. And domestic violence are both serious issues in their own right. But what Christopher McNabb did to his own infant daughter, and what Courtney Bell allowed to happen to her, can only be summed up as pure evil.
Since 911, where's the address of your emergency?
Somebody please send the police. My niece
Okay,
killed
ma'am.
her baby. Please.
What is the address?
5957 Wildwood.
Okay, ma'am.
Lord, help me.
Welcome back to another episode of Killer Bites, the show giving you bite-sized coverage of true crime stories. My name is Allie, and today I'll be telling you about the highly disturbing and gruesome slaying of 3-month-old Janiah Watkins. This case contains detailed accounts of the murder and might be one of the most gruesome and disturbing cases that we've covered. This bone-chilling case started with a troubling 911 call. A distressed man's voice is heard speaking to a police dispatcher in the recorded call. It's clear that he's panicked and distraught, and we're about to find out why.
What do you see when you look at the child?
My children, look, lady, I don't want to describe the scene. The screen is very, very bad, all right? The little baby head is open, like open. I'm not going in there to touch nothing because I don't want to mess nothing up. I'm not going in there to look because I already seen it, but it's very violent. It's a very violent scene.
This man, Robert, had just arrived at his mother, Deborah's house and stumbled into her kitchen to find a terrible scene. As Robert tries to convey what's happened to the dispatcher, he's heard saying that he doesn't know where his little cousin is. Well, come to know that his little cousin is a young woman named Deasia Watkins. And as the dispatcher tries to make sense of what Robert is trying to tell them, the horrifying picture begins to come into focus when the dispatcher asks what happened to the 3-month-old baby. That's when Robert is heard saying, "Lady, the baby is on my mama's kitchen counter with her head smashed." And just a warning to our viewers, this case is only going to get a lot more graphic and disturbing from here, so please watch with care. Robert begs the dispatcher, "Now I need you to please send the police." And as he tells the dispatcher this in the background, you can hear a woman wailing and crying, saying, "She's dead, she's dead." That woman will later be identified as Deborah, Robert's mother. And then the dispatcher is heard desperately trying to make sense of what happened between Deborah's cries and Robert's limited description of a deceased 3-month-old baby. A call that no one ever wanted to get, let alone relive. So what happened? How did this innocent 3-month-old soul meet such a horrible and untimely end? Well, to explain this unsettling case, we'll have to first go back in time a little bit to where it all began. On December 14th, 20-year-old Deasia Watkins and her boyfriend James Brown welcomed their healthy baby girl, Janiah Watkins. It was a happy time for the couple. Everything seemed to be on the up and up for James and Deasia. Deasia was excited to become a mother, and she wanted to give her baby girl a much better childhood than the one she had experienced. And because of that fact, Deasia was determined to give her child all the love she never received. That's why no one could have predicted the dark and gruesome events that would take place over the next couple months. Things began to take a dark turn around January 25th, 2015, at midnight when police were called to Deasia and James' apartment. Multiple neighbors had called the authorities and reported hearing Deasia screaming and Janiah crying. So what happened? What could have caused such a scene? Well, when police arrived at their apartment, Deasia refused to open the door. But when officers threatened to force their way into the apartment, a young man that police would later identify as Chris Gully, James' cousin, opened the door. And what did the police discover when they arrived? Well, the first thing they noticed was a strong smell of... They also noted that Deasia was not acting normal. Her behavior was erratic and strange, and fearing for Janiah's safety, the officers tried to take the baby away from Deasia. But when they did, Deasia snapped. When the officers tried to take the baby from Deasia, she would not let go of the child, and instead she attempted to choke Janiah, who at the time was only 7 weeks old. After the incident, welfare check-ins were issued for both Deasia and Janiah. During these checks, the social workers were able to take Janiah from Deasia. Once Janiah was safely removed from the new mother, Deasia passed out on the floor. After that incident, Deasia was moved to a psychiatric facility for care and was put on a 72-hour investigative hold. And it didn't take doctors long to establish her diagnosis. So what was the cause of this erratic outburst? The following day, Deasia was discovered to be suffering from postpartum psychosis. Postpartum psychosis, also known as PPP, is considered a mental health emergency, and according to one definition of the diagnosis, it's a condition that affects a person's sense of reality, causing hallucinations, delusions, paranoia, or other behavior changes. In severe cases, people with PPP may attempt to harm themselves or their newborn. And clearly, when Deasia tried to strangle her child, the doctors determined she was suffering from this. Fortunately, this condition is treatable, and early treatment is said to increase the odds of a good outcome. But still, this is a very serious condition since the life and well-being of a baby can be at stake. Doctors moved forward with putting Deasia on antipsychotic medication to treat her PPP. But due to side effects of the medication, she was informed that she would have to discontinue breastfeeding Janiyah. And beyond Deasia's ability to nurse her baby, healthcare workers expressed concern to Deasia's caseworker that she didn't seem to be grasping the seriousness of the situation. According to Deasia's case notes, her care workers felt like she was minimizing the incident by implying it was no big deal. But regardless, by January 30th, Deasia was released from the hospital and allowed to return back to her apartment with her baby. However, the hospital did put a strict safety plan in place to keep Janiyah safe. So what did this safety plan include? Deasia was only allowed to have supervised contact with her baby Janiyah, but this was under the condition that Deasia took her prescribed medication. The safety protocol also stated that James or his sister had to be present at all times when Deasia was with Janiyah. So was Deasia on board with all these modifications and rules? Well, a visit from a caseworker revealed that she was not willing to commit to the safety plan completely. It turns out that Deasia hadn't filled a prescription for her antipsychotic medication, so the caseworker reiterated that it was imperative that Deasia take her medication. This care worker reinforced that if Deasia did not take her medicine, it would not be safe for Janiyah to stay in the home with her. Aside from the caseworker's concerns, James also feared for the safety of Janiyah. He made it clear to Deasia that if she did not comply with the safety regulations, that she would have to leave their home. And since the apartment lease was under James' name, he had the ability to kick her out. With the pressure from the caseworker and James, Deasia reluctantly agreed to their terms. After all, Deasia was desperate to not be separated from Janiyah. But in addition to her love for her daughter, she also confessed that she had nowhere else to go. So was this the end of these disturbing events? Unfortunately, it was just the beginning. 1 week later, a caseworker made another unannounced visit to the residence. And at the time of the visit, the caseworker was unable to verify if Deasia had gotten her prescription filled or not. Unfortunately, over the next couple of weeks, things only went further downhill. By February, Deasia had moved out of James's apartment and into a house with her Aunt Deborah. And for a short time, baby Janiyah was in the safety of her father's care. But on March 6th, the couple's custody proceedings began. Because of some murky circumstances, it was discovered that James's name had been left off the birth certificate. Therefore, he was required to do a paternity test to gain custody. Similarly, because of Deasia's mental health issues, she still needed to be evaluated again before she was allowed to have custody over Janiyah. So both parents were not allowed to assume control over their baby. And because of this situation, Deborah, Deasia's aunt, was given custody of the young child. Due to the ongoing court proceedings, neither James nor Deasia were allowed to visit their child, and while they both agreed to the terms, things did not go as planned. During the caseworker's visit to Deborah's home, she confirmed that Deborah told her she was not allowing Deasia to visit, but that it wasn't the truth. In reality, things were not what they seemed, and Deborah was not telling the truth about everything happening inside her home. So what was going on behind closed doors? Well, Deasia had been spending time with Janiyah, and not just a little bit of time. Deasia had actually moved into her aunt's house and had assumed taking care of the baby again. Now, this was clearly in contradiction to the court order and what the doctors had recommended because of her PPP. But nonetheless, Deasia had found a way to be back with her young baby again. See, Deasia had moved into Deborah's house just days before the court order. And at the time when Deborah was given custody, she was also suffering from personal issues and health problems. Therefore, caring for a baby on her own was just too much for her. So with few other options, Deborah allowed Deasia to stay in her home. But unfortunately at the time, this caseworker didn't know any of this. On March 16, 2015, just 3 days after the caseworker's visit to Deborah's home, this truly horrifying and vile murder of poor Janiyah would take place. A dispatcher received an intense 911 call early on the morning of March 16th. On the call, Deborah is heard saying, "She's not supposed to be here, Robert," before begging the dispatcher to send the police. After that, Deborah is heard breaking down into sobs and incoherent ramblings, leaving the dispatcher confused about what happened. Deborah is heard hysterically yelling, "Lord help me," in the recording of the emergency call. That's when the dispatcher asked to talk to the person Deborah was speaking to before she answered the call. And that's when Deborah says the most haunting thing. "My son, He came over here, he found it. I was asleep. So what did Deborah's son Robert find? That's what the dispatcher wanted to know too. She's heard trying to reason with Deborah to calm down, but when that fails, the dispatcher takes a more harsh tone with Deborah. And finally, she was able to get Deborah to calm down enough to explain that her son Robert had come over to her house, woke her up, and told her that baby Janiyah was dead. Then Deborah is heard screaming, "Oh my God, I'm going to jail." And after that, quickly passes the phone to Robert. Robert is able to more calmly tell the dispatcher that he had arrived at Deborah's home just minutes earlier with his children. And unfortunately, it was his youngest child who had arrived in the kitchen first, and it was that child who saw the grisly scene in the kitchen. Seeing what happened, Robert had immediately ushered his kids out of the house to safety. He then re-entered, fearing the worst for his mother, Deborah. He told the dispatcher that he found Deborah asleep in bed and told her what happened. He then tried to find Deasia, but couldn't locate her. But not quite grasping the scene, the dispatcher got firm with Robert and told him, "Okay, I need to know what happened to the baby." That's when Robert panics and tells her that he doesn't know what happened to the baby, that he came into the house and the baby was on the counter. Then he continues saying that all he did was wake up his mother, Deborah, and call the police. That's when the dispatcher asks, "Is the baby breathing?" To which Robert replies, "Listen, lady, the baby is deceased." I can't imagine being on the other end of that call and hearing those words. What a haunting and horrible thing to have to witness and then try to communicate to someone. Minutes later, the first two officers arrived at the scene. One officer quickly made his way to the kitchen and confirmed that baby Janiyah was in fact dead. Meanwhile, the other officer found Deborah in the bathroom. That's when the two officers radioed to other officers to assist on the scene. Amidst the chaos and confusion, the officers began to clear the home, meaning they checked to make sure no one else was inside the house. And while they were clearing the house, officers located Deasia. So where was she when they found her? Well, Deasia was in her bed in her room, tucked under her covers. When officers entered her room, it was a mess. A broken lamp, books on the floor, and clutter everywhere. Seeing Deasia in bed, officers pulled the covers back, and without a word, Deasia was handcuffed and moved to the hallway. Deasia remained under the watch of another responding officer, and the rest of the home was cleared without any other incident. But Deborah and her family could not remain in the house while the police did their investigation, so the family was moved to the criminal investigation section where they were put in interrogation rooms. And this is where the details of what happened in Deborah's home would start to be revealed. A video of Deborah and Robert shows them walking into an investigation room. In the footage, Deborah can be seen crying hysterically and repeating, "They might as well kill me, Robert." Robert tries to console his hysterical mother, telling her, "You ain't done nothing wrong." Deborah continues to unravel and yell out for help, to which Robert replies and tries to get her to calm down. But Deborah continues to scream and cry on the tape. Finally, the detective tells Robert that he has to leave the room so they can question his mother. Reluctantly, he leaves her, and Deborah lets out another cry. Deborah's screams and cries can be heard all the way into the next room where Deasia had been placed to wait for detectives. On a police videotape of the interrogation room, Deasia is shown humming to herself while she waits to be questioned. The hum is haunting and almost childlike. She shows next to no emotion. Could she be in shock? Perhaps. Or maybe in the clutches of an episode brought on by her PPP? It's hard to say, but it's not what someone would expect from a mother who just found out their baby was murdered. Meanwhile, in a nearby interrogation room, Deborah is inconsolable. She continues to say that she doesn't think she can live through this horrible situation. And while the detectives try to calm her down, she can't be comforted. The stark contrast between the two women's reactions to the tragedy is disturbing. Nearly 2 hours passed before detectives finally came into Deasia's room at the police station. And in the video, Deasia can be seen remaining stoic and seemingly unfazed by the horrifying reality that her baby is dead. In fact, Deasia calmly waits for detectives with her head on the table. When the two detectives enter the room, one of the detectives asks her, "Are you Dee Dee?" Clearly a nickname for Deasia. The detective introduces herself, but Deasia barely lifts her head off the table before putting it back down. Her movements seem oddly young and detached. The detectives run through a gamut of different strategies and tactics to get Deasia to speak, but she remains silent. Even when detectives read Deasia her Miranda rights, she still said nothing. Detectives try and ask if Deasia understands what the detectives had read to her, but it's clear she's not going to speak. Not only is Deasia silent, but she barely moves her head or body to acknowledge a detective's presence in the room. They try to ask her if she's okay or if she needs anything, but Deasia remains hauntingly still and devoid of emotion. Determined to get some kind of response from Deasia, the detective scoots her chair over towards Deasia. She stares her right in the eyes and tries asking her simple questions like how to spell her name. but nothing the detective does seems to snap Deasia out of her catatonic state. Lastly, the detectives plead with Deasia that they want to help her. They repeatedly tell her that they can't help her if she doesn't talk. The detectives try both soft and firm tactics, but nothing is working. You can see in the video how desperately the detectives want to get answers from her, but Deasia will not relent. Finally, the detectives have no choice but to abandon the investigation and simply retain photos and her clothes for evidence. Shortly after the detectives leave Deasia, a new team arrives to take photos of her. They tell her to go ahead and stand up, but she refuses to respond. So finally, the detectives order someone to make her stand up. An officer helps Deasia up and photos are taken of her. Then the officers retain her clothes in another room as potential evidence. Deasia is then returned to the confession room in her new clothes, but despite all this interaction with the investigators, Deasia still refuses to speak. After the detectives re-enter, they run through the entire book of interrogation tactics again, but all prove to be ineffective to get Deasia to respond. And after 6 hours, they've gotten nowhere with Deasia, and the meeting comes to an end. After the detectives were unable to get any information from Deasia, she was transported to a psychiatric unit where she once again received treatment for her PPP and was kept for observation. 3 days later, Deasia is returned to the station to meet with detectives again, which is just 3 days after baby Janiyah was found dead in Deborah's home. But this interview goes a lot different than the previous one. In the video, Deasia appears to be slightly more animated. And when asked by 2 male detectives if she's handcuffed, Deasia immediately responds, which is already an improvement. The detective then offers to take the cuffs off Deasia. This time, when asked if she's right or left-handed, Deasia answers right away again. So things are already off to a much better start for detectives, and it's clear even Deasia's demeanor is in stark contrast to the previous interview. Once again, the detectives read Deasia her Miranda rights, and this time Deasia signs the form that she understands her rights. Wow. Quite the difference in just a few days. And after some general questions, the detectives begin to work towards untangling the web of lies that led to an unthinkable horror. The detectives start off by telling her that they are going to ask her some simple questions about her life before the incident. The detective then says, "What I'd like to do is just go back, okay?" He then proceeds to ask Deasia about her history with James and how they became a couple. The detective presses on, asking Deasia about the apartment she shared with James. The interview begins to take a turn when the detective brings up the January 911 call at Deasia and James's apartment. When asked if Deasia remembers the incident, she tells the detective that she does not. The detective responds again, asking, "You don't remember that very well?" Deasia continues to say no. And this would be a common answer throughout this interview until it was not. The detective pushes forward, determined to get to the bottom of what happened and what kind of circumstances would ever lead to the death of a newborn baby. The detective asks again if Deasia remembered being at the psychiatric hospital in January, but she continues to tell the officer that she does not. 3 days earlier, Deborah was asked by detectives about Deasia moving into her house. In this interview, Deborah was assisted by her sister Cindy because she was so distraught. Cindy described the circumstances that led to Deasia coming to live with Deborah. She said that Deasia had called her Aunt Deborah crying and asking to be picked up. So Deborah went and picked up Deasia and let her move in. Meanwhile, in Deasia's interview, the detectives clarified with Deasia that Deborah in fact did come to her apartment and help her move out. And Deasia confirms this chain of events, therefore effectively going against the court orders. The detectives try to clarify with Deasia about this fact. "You were staying there while all this stuff was happening with the courts." Again, confirming that Deasia was there despite being ordered not to be. Deasia again says yes. Then the detectives ask a question I was curious about too. They ask her why James wasn't on Janiyah's birth certificate. You remember this is why James was not granted custody of Janiyah. The detective asked Deasia if James and her had a fight that led him to be omitted from the birth certificate. Deasia explained that he had an ID that had expired, and since it expired, the hospital supposedly said they couldn't put James's name on the certificate. And due to this issue, James had failed when he filed for custody. A simple mishap that could have prevented a horrible tragedy. So much of what happened later might have been prevented if James's name was just on that birth certificate. Next, the detective tries to get information about Deasia's medication. He asks her if she was on medication when she went to stay with Deborah, to which Deasia says she was in fact not taking it. The detective then asks, "Were you supposed to be taking medication?" And Deasia admits, yes, that she was supposed to be on medication. Meaning, Deasia knew that she was supposed to be taking her pills for the PPP. Again, Deasia went against court orders. The detective then asked Deasia why she didn't want to take her pills. Deasia tells the detective that she just didn't want to take them. The simplicity in the answer is so childlike. Detectives asked Deasia how long she was staying at Deborah's house before Janiyah came to stay. to which Deasia says 2 weeks. The detective confirms then that the court gave custody of Janiyah to Deborah, and Deasia confirms this chain of events. And while it's clear that the cops suspect Deasia of being complicit in the crime, they gently try to lead her in that direction. Clearly, they're afraid to scare her back into silence. 3 days earlier, in the interview with Deborah, Cindy, Deborah's sister, explains on Deborah's behalf that during the court case for custody of Janiyah, she spoke with a lawyer. And by the time she came back to speak with her sister Deborah, she found out that the court had convinced Deborah to take Janiyah. Cindy said she told Deborah that she would try to help with the child and that Deborah was hesitant to take on the responsibility for caring for Janiyah, but that she also didn't want to see the baby go into a foster home. But it was clear that Deborah didn't feel like she was equipped to handle the full responsibility of a newborn baby. And maybe that was why she made a tragic decision that she would later come to regret forever. Cindy explains that Deborah got custody of the baby, and that even though she knew Deasia was not supposed to be near the baby unattended, she let her take care of the child. Back in Deasia's interview days later, Deasia is heard saying that she broke the court rules because she missed her baby. Then detectives really dig into what led up to that fateful event in Deborah's house. The detective says on the night that police came to the house, Deborah had already explained that she gave Deasia the baby, and Deasia agreed that this is what happened. So when did things go wrong? The detective asks Deasia if the baby was asleep in the crib or the bed the night of the tragedy. Deasia answers that the baby was in a crib in her room. The detective then says they had found a broken lamp in her room, and he asks Deasia if she knows how it got destroyed. But Deasia says that she doesn't know how the lamp broke. Finally, detectives say that obviously at some point something bad happened with the baby. Then he finally asks if Deasia remembers what happened, but Deasia simply says no. The detective then asks Deasia, how did the baby get into the kitchen? To which Deasia says, I don't know. During this whole interview, she remains calm and her voice is soft and childlike. It felt like the detectives were interviewing a little girl around 8 or 9 and not an adult woman. Then the detectives ask Deasia if she thinks her aunt did something to baby Janiyah. That's when Deasia finally says yes. Well, that's a twist, and not what we were expecting to hear. The detective says once again, so you think it was Aunt Debbie? And again, Deasia says yes. So detectives ask her, what do you think she did? And Deasia calmly says, killed her. The haunting lack of emotion is completely chilling. Detectives realized that Deasia and Deborah were the only 2 women in the house when Janiyah was killed. So detectives now had to figure out what exactly happened and who was ultimately responsible for the horrible crime. Detectives momentarily explored the possibility that Deborah could be guilty. They put together that perhaps Deborah's dwindling health, mixture of her own medications, and the responsibility of caring for a child could have caused her to snap. In Deborah's interview, she is heard saying, I can't live with this on my conscience. Now, these could have been the words of someone who is guilty of a terrible crime, or someone who broke a court order that could have protected Janiyah, and detectives were determined to figure out the truth. In Deasia's interview, detectives asked her how she thought Deborah killed her baby, to which she replied, stabbed her. Then detectives asked if Deasia knew what Deborah stabbed Janiyah with. Deasia then says that the knife was in the baby's hand when she saw Janiyah. This fact becomes very important later on. Detectives asked Deasia to clarify, so she repeats that the knife was in the baby's hand. The detectives asked Deasia if she saw the baby, but Deasia says that she didn't see the baby, which is clearly a contradiction to her previous statement. Things were not adding up for the detectives. How would Deasia know about the knife if she hadn't seen the baby? How would Deasia know how Janiyah was killed if she hadn't seen her? The detectives then asked Deasia to fill in the holes in her story. They asked Deasia to explain how Janiyah went from being a healthy baby to being injured and dying in the kitchen. Deasia tries to blame the incident on her aunt sleepwalking. Well, that clearly doesn't seem like a reasonable explanation of what happened. And it doesn't appear the detectives think so either. This is where the detectives get tired of entertaining Deasia's stories and finally begin to really dig in to figure out what happened to young Janiyah. They tip their hand, revealing that they know Deasia had the knife in her hand, and slowly reveal that they have found her fingerprints on the weapon. But despite the evidence against her, Deasia continues to deny that she hurt her baby. Even with evidence right in front of her, Deasia will not admit to her crime. And detectives realize that evidence against Deasia will not be enough to get her to confess. The detective then takes another angle with Deasia, explaining to her that Deborah was asleep when Janiyah was harmed. And he goes on to say that Deborah also had no blood on her hands or her body. And then the detective asks again if Deasia thinks Deborah is the one that hurt Janiyah, and Deasia says yes. But detectives are not convinced. Not getting where they want to go, the detective finally asks Deasia why her clothes were covered in blood. The photos the detectives had taken of Deasia days earlier showed that she had blood spots all over her clothes, face, and body. Again, the detective tries to persuade Deasia to confess, but she does not. So they scrap a logical approach with Deasia and try a more emotional one. The detective is seen asking Deasia, "Do you know the difference between a bad person versus a bad thing?" From a psychological perspective, most people consider themselves to be good. So if you can get a person to separate what they did from defining their character, then perhaps you can get them to confess to a crime. And that appears to be the angle the detectives are employing here. Detectives double down, telling Deasia that there are bad people out there. Then he goes on to say, there are people out there who are not bad, but who do bad things. This honestly seems like a line out of a movie. But there's a reason why this tactic is used. It can be effective. The detectives stress that there's a big difference between bad people and people who do bad things. And the detectives then double down, saying they're just trying to find out what happened. They then ask, "Do you think something was going on that caused you to do this?" Clearly, the detectives were trying anything to get Deasia to confess. And it seems to work. Deasia is heard saying to the detectives, "They were just trying to take my baby." The detective clarifies, "People were trying to take your baby from you and that upsets you." To which Deasia says, "Yes." The detective continues to Deasia, "So you thought if you did this to your baby, then nobody could take it away from you?" Deasia replies, "I didn't do nothing to the baby." And again, Deasia denies her part in Janiah's death. So detectives then try a new approach with Deasia. The detective tells Deasia, "I don't think you wanted anything bad to happen to the baby." Then goes on to ask Deasia if she agrees that something very bad happened. They explain that what happened to the baby was caused by someone with very deep feelings. Detectives again try to implicate that Deasia is to blame for this crime. They then plead with Deasia, saying that if she could help another mother who also suffered like Deasia did, wouldn't she want to do that? They then add, "You know Aunt Debbie didn't do this." Then the detective says to Deasia, "Do you just not want to believe that you did it?" To which Deasia replies, "Yes." This is a clear breakthrough for the detectives, but it's beyond heartbreaking to witness a woman who is suffering from mental health issues to try to grapple with this horrible situation. And it's beyond tragic that it all happened in the first place. Detectives then ask Deasia what happened that made her so upset the night that Janiah died. They ask her once again how she ended up with so much blood on her. The detective tries to dig in deeper with Deasia's loved ones, hoping that some mixture of tactics will get Deasia to confess to the horrible crime. The detective tells her that while he doesn't think she's a bad person, he does think she's responsible for a bad thing. And he underlines this statement by saying that all the evidence points to Deasia killing her baby. He then goes on to say that Deasia needs to accept responsibility and deal with the consequences of her actions. The detective pleads with Deasia to confess so that the family can move forward. Finally, the detectives state, "Aunt Debbie didn't do this sleepwalking, did she?" And Deasia says, "No." Then again, he asks Deasia, "What set this off? What happened?" Clearly, the detective is trying to uncover the spark that caused the massive explosion of violence that ended in the death of baby Janiah. Finally, Deasia gives a different answer. The answer that detectives knew, but still it was haunting to hear. Deasia says that she took baby Janiah into the kitchen and killed her. And thus, all the denials stop. Detectives finally have their confession. But why did this happen? Detectives push Deasia further to get more answers. And detectives get the full picture of what happened when Deasia finally agrees to describe the horrible events. Once again, we do want to give a warning to our viewers that it's an incredibly graphic and disturbing account of events. Deasia goes on to tell the detectives that she took Janiah to change her diaper, and at that point Janiah started screaming and crying, so Deasia said she couldn't change her. And instead, she threw Janiah across the room. Deasia says that Janiah didn't die with the impact, so she picked up Janiah and banged her head into the bookshelf 4 times. Then she says she picked up a stick and hit Janiah in the head 4 times. But Deasia says that her baby was not dying fast enough, so she says that she went into the kitchen to kill her, to finish her off. She then recounts that she took a knife and stabbed her in the head. Deasia says that she told Janiah to die, die, die. Then she says she stabbed her in the eye, but the baby was still twitching, so she says she just cut off her neck until she died. After this horrifying confession, the detectives asked Deasia how many times she had cut Janiah to get her neck severed, and she simply says, until it sliced off. The other detective follows up asking Deasia why she needed to both stab and cut off the baby's head, and all Deasia says is she wouldn't die. The detective asks how Deasia knew that Janiah wasn't dead, and Deasia says because she kept breathing and moving around. Then he asks Deasia what she did with the knife, and Deasia said that she put the knife in Janiah's hand. And when the detectives ask why she would do that, Deasia replies, so that it would look like she did it. Then detectives ask Deasia what she did after that, to which she replies, I went back to my room.
And horrifyingly, Deaja's account of events was consistent with the evidence the police found at Deborah's house. But detectives still didn't understand what could have prompted Deaja to commit such a horrifying crime. The detectives asked Deaja, "What made you do that?" And all Deaja can say is, "I don't know." They then asked Deaja if she feels bad about what she did to Janiyah. Deaja answers, "No." After that, Deaja was arrested. But the question of why this happened was never really answered. The only reasonable explanation that some could draw was that Deaja's PPP remained untreated and thus caused the outburst. And according to the Hamilton County prosecutor, Health and Family Services did their jobs. The prosecutor's office said they followed court orders, finding a relative to care for Janiyah and checking on her multiple times. But clearly social workers didn't know that Deaja had moved into the aunt's home about a week before Janiyah's tragic murder took place. In Deaja's initial plea in response to her aggravated murder charge, she pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. But the presiding judge ordered that she receive psychiatric treatment, and it was later determined that she was competent to stand trial after receiving the required treatment. However, a trial date never came. In February of 2017, Deaja pleaded guilty to the murder of Janiyah. She received a sentence of 15 years to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 13 years. The tragedy of this case is apparent. It's awful that something so gruesome could happen to someone so young. And we want to extend our compassion to the family that endured this horrific chain of events. That's all I have for you today. My name's Allie, and thanks for watching Killer Bites.
Today I'm covering the case of Sana Houston, a 5-month-old child abused by a caretaker who just so happened to be her aunt after her mother's tragic passing. Our case takes place in Brisbane, Australia, where Sandra Houston and her twin sister Therese Houston grew up. They both stayed in the area and began their adult lives. Sandra met a man named Jason Bowman, and after dating for a while, the two finally decided to tie the knot. Jason worked as a chef, and together the couple had 4 kids. Her sister Therese went on to have 2 kids of her own. Sadly, in August of 2018, Therese passed away unexpectedly. She passed away in her bed after falling asleep from a heart condition she had developed about a month after giving birth to her youngest child, Sana. Obviously, no one had planned on this happening. It was so out of the blue and there wasn't time to prepare for life after Therese. She had left behind 2 young kids. We all hope that when we eventually do go, it's after many years surrounded by our loved ones. But with Therese, it was a complete shock. No one was prepared and they were having a really difficult time coping. Sandra was having an exceptionally difficult time. Therese and Sandra were sisters. They were twins. The bond between the two were tight, and they were the best of friends. There were a lot of logistics to go through after her sister's passing. The biggest being, who was going to take after her kids? Ultimately, responsibility of the caretaker went to Sandra and her husband Jason that very same month. Now, Sandra was in charge of caring for 6 kids. After the 3 months of caring for the new additions to the immediate family, things took a turn for the worse. On November 18, 2018, Jason had come home after a day of working. Everything was completely normal when he walked into their home, located in Waterford West, but then he walked into the couple's bedroom, and what he found really did scare him. On the floor lay Sana, the now 5-month-old child, on top of some bedding from Sandra and Jason's bed. That obviously isn't the place you place a child. So he picked her up, realized that she needed to be changed, and changed her diaper. After this, he went to place Sana in her crib, but immediately started crying. While it's not out of the ordinary for a baby to start crying, it is their only way of communicating. What isn't normal is for a child to go completely limp in your arms. They rushed Sana to the Logan Hospital, and the medical staff hooked her up to a ventilator as fast as they could. The doctors checked on Sana, and what they found was horrifying. She was suffering from shaking baby syndrome. She was comatose, but Sandra didn't seem to have any sense of urgency while bringing her niece in. Shaken baby syndrome occurs after violently shaking an infant or a toddler. This causes major brain damage. Oftentimes, this happens when a caretaker is frustrated by hearing constant crying and doesn't know how to cope. However, the name is debated in the medical community as there can be multiple reasons that the injuries can be caused. Sana's condition wasn't getting any better. In fact, her health was declining rapidly. She was transferred to the Queensland Children's Hospital, and sadly, she passed away the next day from her critical condition on November 19, 2018, around 1:30 in the afternoon. After about an hour, Jason and Sandra left the hospital. Even though Sana needed to be transported to another hospital due to her declining health, they didn't come back to check on her. The police started questioning the family soon after Sana died. When Sandra was questioned, she denied having anything to do with her niece's death. Jason had only walked in on Sana and had been at work all day, so he had a pretty solid alibi. And after that, the police weren't sure where to go next with the investigation. But the case was still open, and they were determined to put the pieces together. A month passed, and there still wasn't any explanation for what happened to Sana. It seemed like just another out-of-the-blue death in the family. Bad luck, perhaps? That is until Sandra walked into the police station and confessed. While speaking with officials, Sandra is quoted saying, "It was me. It must have been me. I was responsible. It is possible that I exerted too much force on the baby." After voluntarily giving up the information, she was charged with murder of her baby niece. In June of 2022, the trial of Sandra Houston began. Her defense team argued that Sandra was under incredible stress. Just 3 months prior, she had lost her twin sister unexpectedly, and then she started taking care of 2 more children on top of the 4 she already had. Jason, her husband, was always working and couldn't be there to help. Her attorney, Catherine Morgan, said that Sandra was barely able to keep up with her own kids, and now she has an infant to take care of. They argued that the injuries could have been caused by any of Sandra's other children. Kids play too hard and accidents happen. They also argued about the possibility of being in the shower with an adult, and she was dropped and squeezed too hard when she was picked up, causing the injuries. But the injuries were so severe. There were cuts and bruises everywhere. This seemed a lot worse than just a random accident. The police tried to state that Sana's injuries started appearing just days after Therese, her mother, had passed. This theory was quickly debunked because eyewitnesses remembered seeing Sana days before she died, and she looked happy and healthy, nothing out of the ordinary. Now, just days before her passing, her grandfather, Neville Houston, visited Sandra, Jason, and all the kids. And Sana was playing around, bouncing up and down in her bounce toy, awake, laughing, and smiling. However, some of Sana's injuries showed signs of healing, meaning she had been hurt before the day leading up to her death. Sandra Lee Houston pled guilty to the charge of manslaughter, although she was originally charged with murder. Manslaughter is known as the lesser charge. She pled guilty to grievous bodily harm and child cruelty. The defense team, however, did believe that Sandra's intentions was not to kill the child. During a psychological evaluation, a psychologist assessed that Sandra was suffering from an out-of-body experience, likely caused by her untreated grief and constant stress, which caused her to act out in a violent rage, ultimately ending the life of her niece. Sandra admitted to being annoyed by the child a lot. Sometimes when she was really frustrated, she would just smack her. She would never seem regretful of her actions because Sana seemed fine afterward. Ultimately, she didn't see anything wrong with these actions. While it doesn't sound like she was remorseful of her actions, her defense team argued that she was. She had lost her best friend, her world had been turned upside down. They believed that she knew she had done something wrong and felt bad for it. Sandra wrote a letter to the court explaining how deeply sorry and regretful she was for her actions. She was ashamed and incredibly guilty. Whether she really feels this way, only Sandra knows. Sana had only been under Sandra's care for 3 months before she died. Her defense team stated Miss Houston was suffering from a state of mind so different from that of ordinary human beings. Her ability to control that impulse to throw Sana was substantially impaired. Her capacity to control her impulses to handle the child properly was also impaired. Sandra was in jail, waiting for over 3.5 years for a sentencing trial. Once the sentencing trial started, the judge in the case, Thomas Bradley, sentenced Sandra Lee Houston to 9 years in prison. She must serve at least 80% before she's even eligible for parole. Because she waited so long for her next trial, she already served quite a bit of time. She'll be out of prison and eligible for parole in less than 4 years. While Sandra had no prior criminal history, her admittance of abuse towards Sana before her death showed that she had a pattern of behavior. And that is the tragic story of Sandy Houston. What do you all think about this case? Everything about it just breaks my heart. There are a lot of layers to this story. I can see how stress and grief completely overtook Sandra, causing her to act out. Still, I'm not excusing that behavior. I'm just saying that the story has a little bit more of nuance. Have you ever heard of this case before? It's relatively new, and Sandra will be eligible for parole in just a few years. So we'll be able to see in real time how the story actually develops. Well, thank you all so much for watching this episode. If you're interested in hearing more cases, you can visit our page to check out other videos. We have quite a few. Until next time, I'm your host, Mac. Stay safe out there.
It is widely regarded that from the moment you have children, then you are no longer the priority. The children you raise are ultimately considered to be your priority above everything else. For the vast majority of people, this evidently is the case, but unfortunately for some unlucky kids, that is anything but true. And in the very worst case imaginable, the outcome is catastrophic. That was the case on June 5th of 2009, when 33-year-old mother Deborah Janelle Jeter committed the most unthinkable act imaginable to her own children. For parents all over the world, it's impossible to comprehend inflicting harm on your own children, making this 911 call even more chilling. Having killed her own kids, she then called 911 to the disbelief of the call handler.
Hill County 911, what's your emergency?
I just killed my children.
Excuse me?
I just killed my children.
Where are you?
I'm in the abandoned house on Highway 77 right after you go underneath the highway. One of them's still alive. Hurry.
How? Under what highway? You're on Highway 77 where?
I'm on Highway 77 right after you go under 35 going towards Milford. Get an ambulance out here to save the one that didn't die. Come on. Hurry up.
What's your name?
Bitch, call them. Have you already called them?
Yes, ma'am, I have.
Okay.
I need your name.
I don't want to tell you my name.
Hello?
Hello?
Are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
77 toward Milford, right after you cross under the bridge. She's telling me she's killed her children. Are you in your car?
No, I'm not in my car. I'm in the house walking around. And one of them's still alive for real. She's asking to be saved, and I couldn't handle that. And so now
she's in an abandoned house.
It's been a long time. She might already die because she's bled out a lot. And hold on. What, baby? What did you say? She said, please send to her.
Okay. Well, we've got people en route. Get an ambulance because one of them's still alive, she said. Can you tell me what happened? Ma'am? Hello? Ma'am?
I can't get the door open.
You can't get what door open, darling?
The front door, so y'all can come in when y'all get here. Why won't it open?
I don't know.
I don't see my one.
Are you on the right-hand side of the road or the left-hand side of the road, sweetie?
I'm at Mother Sister's house. It's going to be cool. They know where it's at.
Okay, they're coming. They're coming. I just want to try to clarify exactly where they are. Can you tell me what happened?
I don't want to say. I don't see any lights. They're not coming.
Well, they're on their way. My partner's getting them to you just as quickly as she can.
Okay.
How many children do you have?
Two.
Huh?
Two.
Two?
Is dead. One of them is dead. She's dead. But the other one, she wants to be saved, and she needs to be saved, and I don't see any lights. Tell them to get down here.
Honey, they're coming. They're coming. Do you have any weapons?
I do. I have a knife.
She has a knife.
Should I throw it away?
No, ma'am. Just put it in. She's got a knife. Can you not tell me what your name is? Huh?
Hold on.
What's your name, darling?
I'm not telling you my name. I'm trying to lost your darling.
How old are your children?
Hold on. You see that? Hurry up.
Honey, they are coming. They're on their way. You should be hearing lights and sirens. Seeing lights and hearing sirens.
I'm going to be with you if everything happens.
Are you still with me?
I'm still with you.
I'm at your way home for the bed.
Hello?
I'm here. They're not here.
They're on their way, sweetheart. They had to come from different parts of the county.
Hold on, kid. They're coming. Tell them not to shoot me. I don't have a gun.
Okay. She doesn't want to get shot because she doesn't have a gun.
When they get there, tell them.
Okay. When they get there,
Uh-huh.
I want you to lay the knife down out. When you get the door open, I want you to lay the knife down so they can see that you don't have any weapons.
Okay. Oh, my God. She's dead. Oh, my God.
How old are the children?
I'm not telling you. She wants you to hurry.
Honey, they are coming. They're coming as fast as they can. They're trying to be sure. Do you see them?
They're coming.
Do you see them? Do you see them?
No, I told her they were coming. Hold on.
The one dog, they back off in the tree.
I see something.
Can you see the lights?
No, I see something down at the end of the road. I see car lights, but not fire lights, not police lights. Cars
She
moving at the end of the driveway.
She says they're at, she
I
can
hear
see
sirens. I hear them.
Okay.
Come out with her hands up.
But I hear them.
Okay, you need to.
People coming up the driveway.
I know, I understand that. I want.
Driveway with my hands up.
She's stayed.
By the house, both hands up, except for one, because I'm on the phone. They're coming.
She's got her hands up except for the fact that the one that she's on the phone with. So she's out in the yard. She says she's out in the yard beside the house.
Okay, goodbye. I see them. They're right here. Goodbye.
All right, bye.
The call was somewhat frantic but clear and concise. Deborah was anything but hysterical, but she was speaking with urgency and a sense of panic. She immediately relayed that she was in an abandoned house and had killed her children. Unsurprisingly, the call handler found it difficult to comprehend what she had just heard and asked her to repeat what she'd just said. At that point, Deborah informed the authorities that one of the kids was still alive and was pleading to be saved. She was urgently requesting that help be sent as she had already bled out and the outcome wasn't looking good. Throughout the call, Deborah can be heard speaking to the stricken child, who must have been terrified. At one point, she suggests that it's too late and that she's just died, although she then goes on to say that the girl wants to be saved. The police arrive shortly after, and Deborah is heard surrendering to the authorities with her hands in the air. Prior to the incident, her husband, Lester Lee Jeter, had filed for a formal separation. The separation apparently hit Deborah particularly hard, and she didn't handle things well at all. She attempted to commit suicide and ultimately had to be rushed to a local medical facility to be saved and for psychiatric treatment. The court records show that there was legitimate concern for the well-being of both Deborah and subsequently of the two Jeter girls. The day after she'd attempted to take her own life at the family home, records show that the court had recorded their concern for the welfare of the family's two girls and feared for the mental condition of Deborah. It was noted that her mental state could mean she was unable to care for the children and that they were at risk. Lester Lee applied for a full divorce and wanted full custody of his two daughters, even requesting for a temporary restraining order to be placed against their mother. It was clear something wasn't right, and it's apparent that there were a number of red flags in the build-up to the eventual tragedy. It was understandable that a hands-on father like he was would have such grave concerns about the mother of his children. Not unsurprisingly, under the circumstances, the courts appeared to think so too, granting a temporary restraining order as requested by Lester over his estranged wife while she was still receiving care and treatment. However, this was short-lived, as the court soon revisited the situation and had the restraining order lifted. Lester also agreed with the judge's assessment that Deborah had never intended any ill will towards the girls or, in fact, never tried to harm them in any way. The two sisters were actually looking forward to seeing their mother, as it had been some time since they'd last been with her. The youngest daughter, Kelsey, was 12 years old and was so excited about the reunion that she even took to her MySpace page to celebrate the fact she'd be seeing her mother the following day. As it would turn out, the excitement would be misplaced following what was about to unfold. The day after the restraining order was lifted, Deborah picked up Kelsey and her 13-year-old sister Kirsten at about 6 p.m. After saying goodbye to their dad, the girls excitedly got into the car after Deborah revealed that she'd prepared a special surprise for them both. It was 3 hours later when Deborah made the harrowing call to 911, shockingly informing the authorities that she'd just killed her daughters. When officers arrived, Deborah was in the driveway of the abandoned property with her hands in the air. As the first response officers investigated the scene, they found both girls in the bathroom, covered in blood. Their mother had slit their throats, and although the youngest girl, Kelsey, was pronounced dead at the scene, 13-year-old Kirsten was alive, but barely. She was airlifted to hospital for emergency surgery while her mother was placed on suicide watch. Miraculously, Kirsten was able to survive this horrendous ordeal. Deborah Jeter was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole after accepting a plea deal that took the death penalty off the table. This outcome spared Kirsten the trauma of having to take to the stand to recount the incidents of that night, something that will no doubt haunt her and her family for the rest of their lives.